Snowfall has already begun in Denver, and we didn't think that would happen until late in the day when the temperature really started to drop. Well, the temperature started to drop earlier in the day, so a wet, slick snow in Denver right now. On the other hand, the storm that we told you would roll into the northwest and might produce some problems is moving slower, and I think it'll be late in the day by this time that storm moves in. So as you look now at the sea...
...should increase their bond holdings to 40%, 15% in cash. And that is the latest in financial headlines. Inside Politics is up next.
The GOP has its eyes on a Capitol Hill prize, the possibility of wresting control of Congress from President Clinton's party.
Republican Oliver North turns out to vote in his combative race against Democratic Senator Charles Robb and urges his supporters to do the same.
The Bush brothers doing battle with Democratic senators in Texas and Florida. Will they sweep, split, or suffer a double defeat? It's all part of this Election Day edition of Inside Politics. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Woodruff at CNN Election Central in Atlanta.
I'm Bernard Shaw. No one has a greater stake in the outcome of this Election Day than President Bill Clinton. For an update on the Oval Office mood, we turn to our senior man at the White House, Wolf Blitzer.
Bernie, the mood here at the White House is one of nervous tension. At this point, our officials are simply hoping to avoid a Republican landslide.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and the First Lady.
The President, First Lady, and their aides were trying to project an upbeat business-as-usual atmosphere, though the stakes for his personal political future are enormous. White House officials were hoping the Democrats would lose only 5 or 6 seats in the Senate and 25 or 30 in the House, allowing them just barely to retain nominal control. That's their best-case scenario. To look optimistic, the President invited White House volunteers to the South Lawn to thank them for their help, and he repeated his campaign plea one last time.
It is very important in this election season that the American people not vote in anger or cynicism.
Earlier, he did some other unusual Election Day campaigning, doing radio interviews by phone with local stations around the country. The strategy was to get out the traditional and this year especially vital Democratic vote. The White House made sure he could be heard by women, minorities, and union voters in urban areas in critical states with close contests, including New York City, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. At one point, he seemed almost resigned to Republican gains he had earlier portrayed as disastrous.
For most of the last 40 years, we've had divided government. We've had the Congress in one hand and the presidency in the other. The American people have kind of gotten used to that. So I don't know that it will make a great deal of difference in that sense.
The vice president did some last-minute morning TV interviews, rejecting predictions the Republicans would take over Congress.
I'm not conceding these Republican predictions. I remember when I heard that Mr. Gingrich and Senator Dole were making their transition plans, I remember that Tom Dewey was doing the same thing on Election Day in 1948. And the voters had a different conclusion.
Republican Party Chairman Haley Barbour concedes Mr. Clinton won a brief boost in the polls while he was in the Mideast for the signing of the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty.
But once he came home and started campaigning for Kennedy and Cuomo and Wofford, and it reminded people of what this election is about, that it's about his policies and the failed Clinton Congress, and whether you want to keep going in the direction Clinton wants to take the country or whether you want to change direction.
Polls in recent days have been predicting doom and gloom for the Democrats. White House officials are hoping those polls have been wrong. Bernie?
Wolf, how will the White House spin turn tonight?
Well, there will be White House officials available to discuss what happens tonight. Leon Panetta, George Stephanopoulos, and others. The president, though, we're told, will not be seen or heard this evening. Tomorrow, though, at 2:30 Eastern, he'll be holding a news conference in the East Room of the White House, and we should get his assessment only then.
Thank you. Wolf Blitzer live at the White House. Judy?
All 435 House seats are at stake in Election USA 94. 35 of the 100 U.S. Senate seats are up for grabs, too. In the Senate, the partisan balance of power currently splits 56 Democratic and 44 Republican. A pickup of 7 seats would give the GOP its first Senate majority since 1986. In the House of Representatives, the balance of power stands at 256 Democratic seats, 178 Republican, and 1 independent. The GOP needs 40 seats to take control of the House for the first time since 1954. We'll discuss the balance of power prospects in the House with political analyst Stuart Rothenberg later on Inside Politics. It would be hard to overstate the volatility of this year's Senate contest in Virginia. It would be difficult to cite a race infused with more venom as well. Coming down to the wire, it is incumbent Democrat Charles Robb versus Republican and former Iran-Contra figure Oliver North. The wild card, independent Marshall Coleman, a former state attorney general. And joining us with the latest, our national political correspondent, Gene Randall, who is at North headquarters in Richmond. Gene?
Judy, though polls closed early here in Virginia, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, it could still be a very late night. It is a close race between Oliver North and Chuck Robb, and few people outside the campaigns themselves are willing to call it.
Senator Robb voted this morning with his wife and 3 daughters in McLean, Virginia, just outside Washington. Robb has been claiming he has momentum on his side, though he knows momentum has to be transformed into votes.
The nice thing is that we have a good day, good weather all the way around, and that's normally very good for Democrats, and it's going to be particularly good here because turnout is the key to this election.
Robb's hopes also rested in part on his ability to attract supporters of independent candidate Marshall Coleman, whose double-digit showing in the polls could split the anti-North vote. A Robb ad in the Washington Post today said, quote, "A vote for Coleman is effectively a vote for Oliver North." North, meanwhile, did his early morning voting with his wife in Pine Grove, Virginia. He has discounted all polls except those from his own camp, which he says put him ahead by 3 points.
Oh, I'd say it's probably going to go the right way, and by 11 o'clock tonight, Bill Clinton's going to have Excedrin headache number 10.
North did have some trouble finding end-of-the-campaign peace and quiet this morning, as dozens of pro-Robb demonstrators, many of them too young to vote, hounded him to and from the polling place. But then there has been a lot of noise generated by both sides in this race for the U.S. Senate from Virginia.
A North campaign source hours ago, noting a large voter turnout in Richmond, said simply, "That is not good news for us." Moments ago, a top campaign aide said, "There is a real nail-biter going on." Bernie?
Thank you, Gene. Another close and combative Senate race, this one in California. Now, this matchup in the Golden State is the costliest Senate race in United States history. In the incumbent's corner, Democrat Dianne Feinstein seeking a full term after being sent to Capitol Hill by that special election in '92. Vying to unseat her, Republican Congressman Michael Huffington, a transplant from Texas with very deep pockets. With the latest, CNN's Greg Lefebvre at Feinstein headquarters in San Francisco.
Bernie, I'm at the Fairmont Hotel above Nob Hill, atop Nob Hill in San Francisco, where Dianne Feinstein's supporters are putting together what they hope will be her second victory party in 2 years. They say they want a big party. They know that they've certainly paid enough to get here tonight. But the question is, did the voters get their money's worth? Dianne Feinstein spent more than $14 million fighting to keep her seat in the U.S. Senate, a colossal amount, but dwarfed by Congressman Mike Huffington's avalanche of cash, his own $27 million.
There is a great need for campaign reform, and that campaign reform should be on a number of fronts. Certainly, one of them is tight spending limits.
The two sides clashed over the hiring of illegal immigrants. Huffington suffered a jolt when he acknowledged an illegal alien worked in his home during the late 1980s. 14 years ago, Feinstein employed an immigrant who apparently entered the U.S. legally but carried no work permit. Immigration is a hot button in California as voters consider an initiative, Proposition 187, that would ban most public services to illegal immigrants.
I think certainly 187 has increased the number of people turning out, feeling strongly on both sides. I think the governor's race and the Senate race play a role in encouraging people to come to the polls.
As he voted in his hometown, Huffington acknowledged the major issues would bring out more than the usual number of midterm voters.
This is an important opportunity for people to change the direction, not only of the state, but this country. And if people want to change, they should vote for me. If they like the status quo and they think the country is going in the right direction, they should vote for my opponent. But I feel very confident after having spent a lot of time meeting 200,000 people, listening to their concerns, that we will win this election because they do want change.
Now, here we are slightly more than halfway through the voting day. Dianne Feinstein's campaign is not over. We understand she will be placing get-out-the-vote telephone calls from her headquarters this afternoon. Greg Lefebvre, CNN, live in San Francisco.
Thank you, Greg. Up next on this hour-long election edition of Inside Politics, we check in on high-profile governors fighting for political survival. They face an angry electorate and, in 2 states at least, the brothers Bush.
CNN's campaign.
Even more so than in previous years, a lot of the suspense and the sparks of Campaign USA 94 are coming from governor's races. One of the more heated matchups is in Texas. Democratic incumbent Ann Richards versus Republican George W. Bush. CNN's Tony Clark is at Richards' campaign headquarters in Austin. Tony?
Judy, voting officials, state officials say the voting appears to be, initially, it appears to be heavy across the state. The weather has cooperated, making it easier for people to get to the polls. That's very important here in Texas because both Ann Richards and George Bush say voter turnout could be the key to victory, and both have been working hard to get their voters to the polls.
And this is Ann Richards. Absolutely. The one and the only.
Governor Ann Richards worked the phones at her headquarters in Austin Tuesday, encouraging supporters to get out the vote. She says the key for her to win re-election is a large turnout. And in her words, she's cautiously optimistic.
I think all the things are in place and all the factors are there. And it's been a tight race, and it will be until the last vote counted.
Richards voted before Election Day. She was one of nearly 1 million Texans who took advantage of the state's early voting period. Her Republican opponent, George W. Bush, waited until this morning to cast his ballot. The son of the former president forgot his voter registration card, but didn't have any trouble being recognized. After casting his ballot, Bush said he feels confident.
We've got a great grassroots organization in place, and if things go the way they think they'll go, I owe a great debt of gratitude to the thousands of Texans who have agreed to help in my campaign. See y'all later.
Bush spent the day relaxing in Dallas and will be here in Austin tonight as the votes are tallied. Going into the election, this race was too close to call, and it should be a long night for everyone. If she wins, Ann Richards would become the first governor in Texas history to serve 2 consecutive terms. Regardless of the outcome, she says this will be her last race for public office. Tony Clark, CNN, at the Richards headquarters in Austin. Bernie?
Thank you, Tony. Now, the other state where Bush is a dangerous word for the incumbent. Florida's Democratic Governor Lawton Chiles is vying against Republican Jeb Bush. CNN senior correspondent Charles Bierbauer is watching the race and the turnout from Bush headquarters in Miami. Charles?
Hello, Bernie. Indeed, the balloons are up, but we can't tell if the balloon will go up yet for George Bush. It's that kind of a race. Conventional wisdom suggests that if the turnout is large, that would favor the Democratic incumbent Lawton Chiles. But the favor would go to Republican challenger Jeb Bush if the turnout is lighter. But conventional wisdom could be off in this case. We've got to break down the demographics even further. So what we're looking at is the ethnic vote, Cuban Americans, African Americans, and the vote upstate versus downstate. Governor Lawton Chiles, showing a lead in the late polls, cast his vote in Tallahassee. Chiles has been through this repeatedly, a 3-term senator seeking a 2nd term as governor. But he's still grumbling about this harsh race.
Everything you do is kind of like you're doing it for the last time. Every campaign is tough. You run everyone like you're behind. I've never had my record distorted like this one in 9 statewide races, but it was a tough campaign.
In suburban Miami, where he voted, Republican Jeb Bush predicted a close win, not an easy one. Then Bush headed off to make one last push for the Cuban and Hispanic vote.
Countywide, right now, the first projection is that it'll be 80% Hispanic turnout, which is phenomenal. And the other groups aren't nearly as high.
Bush's daughter Noelle was helping out, but his parents, George and Barbara, who helped raise campaign funds here, are staying home in Texas.
I talked to my dad last night, and he was a nervous wreck. I know this from firsthand knowledge, that it's a lot harder to be the father or the son of a candidate than it is to be a candidate.
Jeb Bush says he also talked last night with his brother George, the Texas candidate, for the first time in months. Bush will be here in Miami watching the returns and hoping for a Bush family reversal of fortune. Governor Childs has left Tallahassee en route to a traditional cup of coffee in Tampa. The Childs campaign is heavy on tradition, and that may not seem terribly significant, but the governor has never lost a race here in Florida, and he's been in a lot of them. Charles Bierbaur, CNN Live from Miami.
Thanks, Charles. Nervous wreck, eh? Well, we'll see. As in many races, turnout also is key in California, where Republican incumbent Pete Wilson faces his Democratic challenger Kathleen Brown. CNN's Pat Etheridge is at Wilson headquarters in Los Angeles. Pat?
Well, in just a few hours, Governor Pete Wilson will be joining his supporters here in the Grand Ballroom of a Los Angeles hotel. He's hoping, of course, there will be cause for celebration in the wake of a close race for the California State House. Republican Governor Pete Wilson got up early to vote in his hometown, San Diego. He's hoping for a second term to head up the State House. Democratic challenger Kathleen Brown cast her ballot with family members in Los Angeles.
All voted. We're all set. Say, everybody out there, vote for Grandma.
The 49-year-old grandmother, daughter of Pat Brown and sister of Jerry, is hoping to make history, becoming the third member of her family to be elected governor of California. Proposition 187 is the lightning rod issue driving this election. Weeks of angry protests have prompted Los Angeles authorities to put law enforcement on alert, on the ready should any problems arise. Brown strongly opposes 187 and is pinning her campaign hopes on a strong voter turnout.
I think those people that vote against it, I hope, will vote for me and vote against someone who has made it such a cornerstone of his campaign.
Wilson supports the measure to cut public services to illegal immigrants and has made it a central theme in his re-election bid.
I think it'll pass. I think that people all over California of all races understand what it's about. They understand that it's an effort to bring fairness.
Well, nothing definitive yet to report on voter turnout, but we can tell you here in Los Angeles County, only about 16% of the voters have cast their ballots so far. But keep in mind it is early on the West Coast, and some experts are predicting that what they call the not likely voters will turn out in force as the day unfolds. We're here to keep you posted. For now, I'm Pat Etheridge reporting live in Los Angeles.
Thank you, Pat, and we'll examine some more hot races when we come back.
Including one with a Democratic incumbent who the Republicans would especially like to put on their trophy wall.
Every company has an Edwina.
Not since Nelson Rockefeller has a New Yorker won 4 straight elections for governor. Well, today, Democrat Mario Cuomo is trying to equal that political feat. But he has to get by Republican George Pataki and several independents, including millionaire Thomas Golisano and anti-abortion activist Robert Walsh. CNN's Jeannie Most joins us from Cuomo headquarters in the Big Apple. Jeannie?
Judy, when he voted for himself this morning, Mario Cuomo seemed a little on the mellow side, a little subdued. He compared waiting for election results to waiting for a jury verdict or waiting for a baby. And this could be quite a wait tonight because this is expected. This race is expected to be a squeaker. Now, Mario Cuomo was ahead of his opponent, George Pataki, in the latest polls, but only by a couple of percentage points. Could this be the final curtain for Governor Mario Cuomo, or is it simply the next act? His opponent nearly lost his head in the voting booth, but he's not prepared to lose the race.
Everybody is fired up and pumped up, and we're going to win the race.
After 12 years, it seemed New Yorkers didn't love Mario Cuomo anymore. He went from being the golden-tongued darling of Democratic conventions.
We give money to Latin American governments that murder nuns, and then we lie about it.
To being the subject of a bumper sticker with a message that stuck. Cuomo's relatively unknown Republican opponent has one big advantage. He isn't Mario Cuomo.
Mario Cuomo, too liberal for too long.
But New York's Republican mayor gave Cuomo a hand, a big hand.
Mario Cuomo is so much better than the Republican alternative that I had to cross party lines.
Talk about cross. Listen to this angry heckler at a Cuomo rally.
Giuliani is a whore. Can I tell you something? The way you use that word, you look to me like a guy who's very familiar with the species.
The leaves changed and so did the polls. Cuomo up, Pataki down, Pataki gaining at the end. But an independent millionaire candidate named Thomas Golisano could wipe the smile off Pataki's face by siphoning off enough votes to help Cuomo win. And in a departure from normal practice, George Pataki is out campaigning today. Usually on Election Day, most candidates sort of call it a day and relax, but Pataki, in about 10 minutes or so, is expected to be outside Penn Station here in New York, campaigning among commuters. After all, there's about 4 hours until the polls here in New York close. I'm Jeannie Most, reporting live from Cuomo headquarters in New York.
Thank you, Jeannie. Now, another Democratic icon who looked to be in trouble was Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts. But political winds in the Bay State now seem to be blowing against GOP challenger Mitt Romney as Kennedy bids for a 6th full term. CNN's Candy Crowley is at Kennedy headquarters in suburban Boston.
Bernie, there was a time when it looked as though this might be ground zero for Democrats. Senator Ted Kennedy, a 32-year veteran of the Senate, the leading voice of liberalism in Washington, looked to be in real trouble. His challenger, a moderate Republican named Mitt Romney, was putting up quite a fight. And there was a time when it looked as though Romney, who is the son of the former governor of Michigan, might even pull this out. But that's not how it looks this evening. Polls show he's going to lose this race, but en route to the poll he hopes will prove all the others wrong. Mitt Romney had a smile on his face and a bit of hope in his heart.
I get more and more support every day, and I'm very much planning on winning this one.
Doing his bit to turn out the vote, Romney arrived at the ballot box with his wife, 3 voting-age sons, and 1 daughter-in-law.
We're going to stuff the ballot box legally. There you go.
Though he looked highly vulnerable when the election season began, Ted Kennedy now enjoys a comfortable lead and appears headed for his 6th full term as the senator from Massachusetts. The senator spent a quiet election day, but his campaign remains at full throttle. Aides say up to 300,000 calls will be made urging the faithful to the polls. A heavy turnout is expected to favor Democratic candidates in this heavily Democratic state, and turnout is described as brisk. The Massachusetts Secretary of State thinks if the pace continues, more than 2/3 of registered Massachusetts voters will cast ballots. After all the shouting,
Go, Mitt, go! Go, Mitt, go!
and after all the speeches,
do you know that since Ted Kennedy's been in Washington, he's voted for higher taxes 69 times?
Nothing else will work unless we have a growing, sound economy, and that means jobs. Jobs, 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 jobs for Boston, and jobs for Massachusetts.
The real sound of democracy seems quietly reassuring.
Pull the red lever to your right. On your way out, go to the left.
If Ted Kennedy wins this race, as he's expected to, there will, of course, be many reasons talked about it the next morning, but one of them seems overriding, and that is the message of tradition. As one Kennedy supporter put it, you know, when you go into that voting booth, when you turn around, the pull is very strong to still pull the lever for a Kennedy. Candy Crowley, CNN Live, Boston.
Thanks, Candy. Please don't touch your channel. We have another half hour to go in our Election Day special edition of Inside Politics. When we come back, we'll look at the balance of power in the House with our political analyst, Stuart Rothenberg.
And our election coverage is only beginning. In just 1 hour, we'll have a special election preview you won't want to miss.
Election night results with Republican Chairman Haley Barbour and Democratic Chairman David Wilhelm on Larry King Live tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Here's how people use News Radio 740 KTRH.
I can't be late. AM 740 has more traffic and weather updates than any other station.
The midterm election campaigning is over. The knowledge of whether his party will lose control of the Senate, the House, or both lies ahead. Though Mr. Clinton has been keeping a low profile today, he did show up on the White House lawn this afternoon to say thank you to volunteers. A last-minute decision was made to open the event to the press. perhaps in hope of getting in one last presidential appeal to voters to try to limit the Democrats' losses.
At these midterm elections, it is critical that people understand that there are clear choices between going forward and going back, between a government that works for ordinary families and one that works for organized interest, between a government that does something about our great national problems like crime and one that just tries to talk them to death. It is very important in this election season that the American people not vote in anger or cynicism.
Mr. Clinton undoubtedly will have much more to say when he holds a post-election news conference. CNN plans live coverage tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Eastern.
Will it be a GOP landslide or an amazing show of Democratic survival? Let's get some final predictions and some early spin on where Washington may go from here. Senior Presidential Advisor George Stephanopoulos will join us shortly. First, let's talk with Jack Kemp. He's the co-director of the conservative advocacy group Empower America and former housing secretary. He joins us from Washington. Welcome.
Thank you, Bernie.
First question. Could your opposition to Prop 187 in California actually turn out to hurt your party's Republican Senate candidate?
Well, I don't see it happening. Pete Wilson is way up in the polls, in the exit polls. I don't know how 187 is doing, Bernie, but in my view, it was very important to speak out on a matter of principle and conscience, and I can understand the message that California wants to send to Washington to do something about the border and about illegal immigration, but I didn't like the wording. I thought it was going to be potentially discriminatory against people of color. And I think someone had to get people to read the actual language, and that's what we tried to do, and hopefully they'll read it and make a decision that I trust that the electorate will make.
I'm curious, did you ever try to talk to Michael Huffington, the Republican going against Dianne Feinstein, to try to turn him around?
No, I never tried to talk to Huffington or Pete Wilson or Dana Rohrabacher. I think, you know, I think that it was important for them to make up their own minds. As for me and Bill Bennett, we made up our minds when we read the actual language and found it to suggest that public health and public educational officials were to turn over to the INS people who were suspected of being illegal immigrants. To me, that is not my view of America, nor is that what I want the Republican Party to be all about.
Jack Kemp, do you see Governor Pete Wilson as a potential Republican presidential candidate?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And a good one, by the way.
If the Republican Party gains control of the House, has Newt Gingrich sullied the waters of bipartisanship?
I don't believe so. He said the other day that if they captured the House, he would treat the minority, in this case the Democratic Party, the way that he wished he'd been treated when they were in the majority. To me, that's the golden rule, and I commend Newt for making that statement. I think both Republicans and Democrats ought to get together, including the president, and work out some modus vivendi, some way of living together. They'll have differences, and they'll have issues upon which they can agree. Don't forget, it was Newt Gingrich that passed NAFTA for President Clinton, which is still confounding to the Clinton administration.
If the Republican Party takes control of the United States Senate, should Bob Dole be allowed to be majority leader and run for the presidency?
Oh, I think that's up to Bob Dole. I respect Bob too much to make that decision or even comment on that decision. It's a matter of conscience, and could he do it? The answer to me is yes, but it's his decision to make, and I trust that Bob will make the right decision for himself and the party and the country.
When are you going to announce your candidacy?
Well, I said a long time ago when you asked me this question that I would make that decision in 95, early 95, not 94. I think these elections and this year is too important to mix it up with presidential politics 96. Okay. 94 is going to be very important as it is today, and I'll let you know, Bernie.
Well, we'll be listening. Next question. If Governor Mario Cuomo hangs on and is reelected as governor of New York State, should Republican Mayor Rudolph Giuliani be read out of the Republican Party?
No. No. I said on the Evans and Novak show on CNN on Saturday that unity in a party does not require uniformity or unanimity. I think Rudy made a terrible mistake both politically and economically. Mario Cuomo is the highest taxing governor in the history of this country, par excellence. I disagree with that. Giuliani is defending. Mario Cuomo ranks up there with, I think, a giant political mistake, but ruled out of the party? Absolutely. No way.
You're really boiling, though, over that endorsement of him.
I don't boil. I'm not angry over that. I said that with sadness in my heart, not anger. I'm not a politician of anger. People can disagree with me. Someone said, Kemp better have a bulletproof vest if he ever comes back to California. I went to California the other night and watched my son play football. People weren't mad at me. They can respect conscience.
Last question. You've accused the White House, President Clinton, his aides, of playing the race card. What do you mean?
Well, I said the Democratic Party was playing the race card because that's about all they... When the president said that cutting taxes, and Jesse Jackson said cutting taxes, and Mario Cuomo said cutting taxes was racist, I suggested that the real race card was being played by people who keep taxes too high and deny low-income people and people of color a chance to get access to capital and credit and jobs and opportunity. So it was an answer to some of the charges that Republicans wanted to cut taxes to hurt the poor. Nonsense. Wanted to destroy Yellowstone National Park. That is absurd, and that they were practicing the politics of fear.
Thank you. Jack Kemp from our Washington Bureau. And as soon as we return from the White House, Presidential Advisor George Stephanopoulos.
You find yourself in an inverted 12-week cycle. Now, there are many oscillations in strength, but you must look...
Advisor George Stephanopoulos, welcome.
Hi, Bernie. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
I'm doing well, thank you.
It's going to be a long night.
Well, election days are always like this, but we're getting used to it.
In fairness to you and the man you work for, assuming you heard Jack Kemp, I asked him to explain what he meant in using the words race card and accusing the White House, the president, Democrats of using or playing the race card. You heard what he said. You have an opportunity to respond.
Well, it's pure fiction, Bernie, and he's engaging in exactly the kind of racial scare tactics that he accused the White House of engaging. The president never said any such thing. The White House has never said any such thing that the Republican policies were racist, and I think that Jack Kemp knows that, and I think he owes the president and the White House an apology for it. It is important to point out, however, that the Republican contract with America, which is $1 trillion in promises, would create either an exploding deficit or devastating cuts across the board in Social Security and Medicare and all domestic programs. That's one of the messages the president brought to the country over the last several weeks. But for Mr. Kemp to suggest that the president ever played the race card is a falsehood, it is wrong, it's a lie, and he should apologize.
In a different kind of race, Virginia, the Senate race, Oliver North and Chuck Robb. As he was coming out of the polling place this morning, Oliver North said, quote, Bill Clinton is going to have Excedrin headache number 10. What say you?
I say Oliver North's going to have Excedrin headache number 12 because Chuck Robb's going to beat him tonight. We feel good about that race. It's obviously a close race, but we believe the people of Virginia are going to return Chuck Robb to the Senate. I would also point out, Bernie, that I think that all across the South, we're going to see some Southern governors doing very well. Zell Miller in Georgia, who had 7 weeks of negative advertising against both him and President Clinton thrown at him in Georgia, looks like he's going to win in Georgia, and we feel good about that.
What are your tracking polls telling you about turnout nationwide in areas where you really are sweating?
It's sort of hard to say, Bernie. You know, you never can be sure. We've had a lot of anecdotal evidence from around the country that turnout is relatively high for an off-election year, but we really can't be sure until the polls are closed. That's really a question for tomorrow.
Our man at the White House, Wolf Blitzer, described the mood there as one of nervous tension. How tense?
I think nervous tension is the way that everybody feels on Election Day whenever you're facing elections across the country. So sure, we're watching and waiting for the results like everybody else. We feel good about the campaign the president ran, the choices that he framed. We feel good about our candidates, and now we'll wait and see what the voters decide.
In terms of the ambitious program that you and the president and other members of the White House staff have been working on, especially health care, how much will President Clinton be a hamstrung Bill Clinton tomorrow morning?
I don't think he'll be hamstrung at all, Bernie. You know, he was elected in 1992 on a platform of change, on a platform to move the economy forward. That's exactly what he's done. I would also point out that if you look over the last Congress, there were many, many instances. The North American Free Trade Agreement, the Brady Bill, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, the Family and Medical Leave Act, where Republicans and Democrats of goodwill were able to work together to move the country forward. The president's ready to reach out his hand to members of any party who are willing to move forward, get the economy moving on things that are important to the American people, and we're going to do that.
Do you believe that Newt Gingrich can be bipartisan?
Of course he can. He was bipartisan on the North American Free Trade Agreement, and we hope we can work together with Newt in the coming months.
Bob Dole?
Absolutely.
What are your numbers right now in your own head, on your own tally sheets, telling you about the shape-up of the Senate tomorrow morning and the House?
It's just too hard to say right now, Bernie. You know, the polls are still out. We still hope we can hold the Senate, we can hold the House. We're looking forward to the results tonight, but we'll know a lot more in the morning.
Did the president make any mistakes during the run-up to this election day in terms of the campaign?
Oh, I think the president ran a very good campaign. If you look back over the last several weeks, Newt Gingrich was saying that he was going to win 70 seats in the House. I don't think anybody thinks that right now. He campaigned in Massachusetts, in New York, in California, and Pennsylvania, and many other states where you see our candidates doing much better than would have been predicted just a few weeks ago, and that's because the president was energetic. He framed the choice. He encouraged the people to continue to move forward on the start we've made on turning this economy around.
Last question, George. Is this a referendum on Bill Clinton?
I think this election, just like the election in 1992, is about the pace of change in this country. People are frustrated. They certainly want action out of Washington, and they often get disappointed in the way that Washington works. We get frustrated by that, too, and we're committed to making sure it works no matter what happens tomorrow.
George Stephanopoulos, thanks for joining us on this special edition of Inside Politics.
Thank you, Bernie.
You're welcome. Judy?
Will this man be the Speaker of the House next year? Or might Georgia residents even vote him out in favor of someone new? A look at both possibilities when Inside Politics returns. The Republicans took control of the Senate away from the Democrats was in 1980. They lost control in 1982. They lost control in 1986. Going into election 94, the Senate balance of power looks like this: 56 Democratic seats, 44 Republican. Of the 35 Senate seats at stake today, 22 currently are in the Democratic column. The GOP needs to pick up 7 seats to gain a majority. Another of this day's big question marks involves the House of Representatives. Many eyes will be on Washington's 5th congressional district and the race between Republican George Nethercutt and House Speaker Tom Foley. Even if Foley wins, pundits are asking whether he can hang on to the Speaker's job. He and Nethercutt cast votes at polling places only about 1 mile apart. Nethercutt was outspent about 3-1 in the race, but it is considered a dead heat.
For the first time in 40 years, there is the very real possibility the GOP may win control of the House of Representatives, the magic number 40. That's how many seats the Republicans need to pick up tonight to win a majority in the House. Will they get there? Political analyst Stu Rothenberg is here with a forecast. First, Stu, which states should we be watching now at 23 minutes after 5 Eastern Time?
Well, Bernie, the first states are going to close at around 6 o'clock. That's Indiana and Kentucky are the first states to watch. And Indiana has 3 races in particular that I think will tip the hand on what this election is like. In Indiana, too, this is the Phil Sharp, Democratic Phil Sharp's open seat. It is basically a Democratic tilting district. The Democrat nominee, Joe Hogshead, is the Secretary of State. He ran for the U.S. Senate 2 years ago. When he started his congressional run, he acquired lots of campaign funds, put them in the war chest. He looked like he was going to be the clear front runner. Republican David McIntosh has come on very fast, closing this so that the race is now a toss-up. If the Republicans take this seat that they've wanted to get for many cycles, I think it will indicate something about open seats. Second of all, I'd look at Jill Long in Indiana 4, a Democratic congresswoman who is in a very Republican district. Democrats are quite nervous about this race. It was not on the chart months ago, and suddenly she's in trouble. David Sauter is the Republican nominee. If this race turns, it suggests that Republican voters are staying home. They're not ticket splitting. They're not going with Democratic incumbents. This would be another tip of the hand. The other one is Indiana 8, where Democratic Congressman Frank McCloskey is in trouble and frankly is now an underdog. And I cite one race in Kentucky, Kentucky's 1st congressional district, a very anti-Clinton but very Democratic district where Tom Barlow, Democratic freshman, is in trouble.
And those are all at 6 o'clock poll closing time.
6 o'clock early.
Let me ask you about some of the big names in the House who are rumored to be, more than rumored to be in trouble. Newt Gingrich.
Newt Gingrich depends on who you listen to. The Democrats point to polling that shows Gingrich with a 6 or 8 point lead. Republicans say Gingrich is up by 30 points. Think about this one. If he's up by 30, why did he cancel speaking engagements in California to rush home to campaign right at the end of the right as we come to Election Day? I don't think this is a 30-point race. It's not a 6-point race. He's probably up by 10 or 15. He's a favorite, but Ben Jones is very likable, and he's taking advantage of the fact that Newt Gingrich's poll ratings are not favorable, unfavorable ratings are not that good.
What about Dan Rostenkowski of Chicago?
Well, this one, if Rosti wins, the Republicans are really going to kick themselves. They think they have him. They are concerned that the news leaked out a bit too soon, that he was way behind in private Republican polling, and the Democrats had a chance to crank up Mayor Daley of Chicago. This is it's a concern to them, but I've called around, and I can't find very many people, Republicans or Democrats, who think that Rosti is going to survive.
All right, we'll talk to you about Mr. Foley later. Thank you, Stu Rothenberg.
Thanks a lot. We've talked a lot this election year about national electoral mood. And today, exit pollsters are quizzing voters to find out what that really means. Political analyst Bill Schneider joins us with a preview when we return.
What am I doing here with you?
You're my brother. It's your genetic obligation to help me.
Right.
And our man Bill Schneider has been crunching those exit poll numbers, and he's picking up some very interesting early trends. Here with us to give his assessment, President William Jefferson Clinton was not on the ballot. Will what he did campaigning have an influence on the outcome today?
Bernie, we found in previous midterms that the president's job approval rating does have an important impact on the outcome. Now, we can look at some suggestions of this from some broad trends in the exit poll today. For instance, we find that the president is getting a 51% approval rating among voters in the East. In the West and Midwest, his approval rating is dropping to 44%, and in the South, he's the least popular of all. This is his native part of the country. His approval rating drops to 36%. Does this have an impact on the vote? Let's take a look at how they're voting in each region for the House of Representatives. In the East, 52% of the voters, a majority, tell us they're voting for the Democrat for the House. In the West and Midwest, the vote is splitting about 50-50, and in the South, which used to be the solid South, the most Democratic part of the country, the Democratic percentage of the House vote is dropping to 40%. So what we can see is, yes, President Clinton's approval rating does appear to have a direct relationship to how people are voting around the country today.
All right, Bill, what else do we learn from these exit polls?
Well, we're going to be able to tell you a number of interesting facts, we hope, from the exit polls. One thing is the Ross Perot effect. Did his supporters do what Ross Perot suggested that they do when he endorsed candidates around the country, like Frank Lautenberg in New Jersey and Ann Richards in Texas? Did they vote Republican for Congress, as he suggested they do? And we'll also be able to tell you in which races the Perot supporters actually made the difference, where they determined the outcome, where it would have been different without the Perot voters. The economy. Remember the stupid economy from 1992? That's kind of a mystery. In a lot of parts of the country, the economy is doing well. Do people think the economy is doing well? And if they do they give either party or candidate the credit? We're going to look at anti-incumbency factors. Are people voting against incumbents? And if so, is it for both parties? And finally, we're going to look at the impact of the ads in races around the country, particularly where Democrats were portrayed as too close to Clinton. Did that have an impact on the voters?
Okay, thanks very much, Bill Schneider. One question I'm going to ask you later tonight is to tell all of us why this was such a negative campaign. We'll do that later in our election night coverage. Okay. That's all for this special edition of Inside Politics. I'm Bernard Shaw.
And I'm Judy Woodruff. And stay tuned to CNN throughout this night for complete election coverage, starting with a Campaign USA 94 election preview at 6 p.m. Eastern. Bernie and I will be back with full election coverage starting at 7 p.m. Eastern. Showbiz Today is next.
Election night results with Republican Chairman Haley Barbour and Democratic Chairman David Wilhelm on Larry King Live tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Healthy state since 1939.
Here's how people use News Radio 740, KTRH.
I can't be late. AM 740 has more traffic and weather updates than any other station. KTRH saves me time.
I like country music, but when I want to know what's going on, I switch to News Radio AM 740 KTRH.
AM 740 is for I hear Oilers and Rockets games. Plus scores, KTRH Sports Beat, Bush Bomb.
Give us 30 minutes, and we'll give you the world. News Radio 740, KTRH. This bank works like business works. To do a good job. To take your business.
This is CNN.
CNN calls the winner in the South Carolina governor's race. He is David Beasley, the Republican. That means the GOP holds on to that seat.
A very important victory for Christian conservatives who lost their candidate in Virginia, Oliver North. Beasley was elected to South Carolina into the House as a Democrat when he was in college, rose in ranks to become the youngest Speaker pro tem and majority leader in any state legislature, switched to the Republican Party, and is a leader in the Christian conservative movement around the country.
Taking you out into the far Pacific, CNN declares that Daniel Akaka, the Democratic incumbent, has won, turning back a challenge from the rancher out there, 76-year-old Maria Hustis. He is going back to Washington.
This was a safe Democratic seat. He's a native Hawaiian. He's finishing the term of the late Senator Spark Matsunaga. He's now running for his first full term in the Senate.
We should note that it's after midnight now, and the polls have closed in all 50 states. At midnight, they close, Eastern time anyway, they close in the state of Alaska.
So if you think you've had a lot of information, you haven't seen or heard anything yet. Republicans from coast to coast, and certainly those in the Senate and the House, those who ran tonight, are singing happy days are here again, because Bruce Morton, who's at the Senate desk, is going to help us give you an idea of how the Senate committees in Washington will shape up. Bruce?
Well, Bernie, the fact is the Senate is virtually certain to be Republican. I can't think of anything that could happen now. We've declared so many races that could turn that around. So take a look. The Banking Committee will be chaired by Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York, whom we've seen on the air this evening. You can bet there will be aggressive Whitewater hearings, because that's a favorite cause of his. John Chafee of Rhode Island gets Environment. Bob Packwood gets the Finance Committee, which he chaired the last time the Republicans had the Senate. William Roth of Delaware, who was reelected tonight, gets Government Affairs. Strom Thurmond, as I mentioned a while ago, gets Armed Services. Jesse Helms of North Carolina gets the Foreign Relations Committee. There'll be a big change of tone there, a lot less welcome to the United Nations, for instance. What really happens legislatively may not change that much, Bernie, because as we all learned these last 2 years, now that everything, including the reading of the minutes, gets filibustered, you need 60 votes to get anything through the United States Senate. Mr. Clinton didn't have those last time. The Republicans won't have those this time. But what will change is the tone, the agenda of the debate. They'll be arguing about what defense programs to increase, not how to spend the peace dividend, things like that. And I think the other thing that's happened is a lot of the new Republicans are very conservative Republicans. Fred Thompson in Tennessee campaigned limit congressional sessions to 6 months, cut their pay and send them home. Bill Frist, the other new Tennessee Republican, very conservative. Jim Inhofe out west. So the whole Republican caucus is going to be more conservative than it was, and that's going to push Majority Leader, as we assume he'll be Bob Dole, to the right. The whole tone of the debate is going to move, I think.
Bruce, I'm looking at the list here, and what really, two things surprised me. First of all, the new chairman of the Labor Committee will be the senator from Kansas, the junior senator from Kansas, Nancy Landon Kassebaum. And I'm really surprised that as you look at the Agriculture Committee, Richard Lugar of Indiana, who's been a stalwart on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, now becomes chairman of Senate Agriculture.
Well, seniority rules, as you know, Bernie, and that's just the way the numbers come out.
Yep. Okay, thank you. Bruce Morton at the Senate desk. We can't say it enough. This has been an absolutely politically gaga night. Another chapter in American political history.
But you notice from the White House, we heard conciliatory sounds. Of course, they have very little choice. They have to live with the Republican Congress. But from when we talked to Bob Dole and when you interviewed Newt Gingrich, they weren't sounding angry and combative. We're going to stop everything President Clinton wants to do. We heard a little bit of a new Newt, so to speak. He said he intends to be Speaker of the whole House, not just the spokesman for the Republican Party. So there's a sense of perhaps maybe a glimmer of bipartisanship coming out of the Republican Congress.
You don't suppose that the message the voters were sending may have gotten through to the Republicans and the Democrats in Washington?
Well, I think it certainly got through to the Republicans. And I think Dee Dee Myers of the White House, the president's press spokeswoman, indicated that it got through to the Democrats. She said it's clear that the American people want to see some change in her interview with Wolf Blitzer. And I think the Republicans realize that if they don't produce over the next 2 years, guess what? The voters will come back and do it again. I've always maintained the American voters are in such a surly mood. They know they're the consumers. They want to see action. If they don't get it, they'll go to the polls. They'll do again what they did tonight.
CNN's Brooks Jackson has been taking a look not just tonight, but for the last number of weeks and even longer at how much money is being spent in some of these campaigns. Tonight, right now, he's going to talk to us about some of the so-called millionaire candidates. Brooks?
That's right, Judy. And first, for all the talk we've heard of change tonight and the desire for change and the big changes we're seeing, in one sense, it's been business as usual tonight. 31 Senate races, by my count, have been declared so far. In every one of those Senate races, except 2, the person who spent the most money got the most votes. The exceptions are Ollie North, of course, in Virginia, spent $20 million and lost, even though he outspent Chuck Robb by about 4 to 1. And in Tennessee, Jim Cooper marginally outspent Fred Thomas, $3.5 million to $3 million, and yet Mr. Cooper lost. His campaign was fueled by a lot of money from healthcare interests, which were interested in his more moderate version of health reform in the House. The Senate remains a millionaire's club, but not every millionaire can get in, we've seen tonight. Those winning include Herb Kohl of Wisconsin, who spent $6 million of his own money to win re-election. Very seldom do you see millionaires spending a lot of money out of their own pocket to win the second time, to run the second time, but Senator Kohl has done it. Frank Lautenberg, $900,000 to help him hold on to his seat in New Jersey. But look at some of the millionaires who lost. Mitt Romney in Massachusetts spent $3.6 million losing to Ted Kennedy. Richard Fisher, $2 million in Texas, losing there. And we could go down the list a little bit. But a lot of personal money went into losing races tonight. Back to the national desk.
Thank you very much, Brooks. CNN is ready now to call a race in Washington State. Incumbent Republican Senator Slade Gorton, no, he's not. He's 66 years old. He's the incumbent. He has beat back a strong challenge from Rod Sims, the 46-year-old African-American council member in Seattle. President Clinton had campaigned out there.
Yes, and this looked like one of the few Republican seats that might go Democratic. He was elected in 1980, lost in 1986, then was elected again in 1988, and seeking his second consecutive term.
And with that call, that means the Republicans will definitely have control of the Senate. They have now picked up enough seats so that even if they lost a seat somewhere else, they would still have control of the Senate, so it's now official.
This is official. The Republicans will be the majority party in the new Senate. President Clinton is going to have to live with a Republican Senate and possibly also a Republican House. The cynics would say this was a vote for gridlock, but I think it's easier to say, and the data point to the conclusion that it was a vote for bipartisanship, for centrism. People want to see the Democrats and Republicans cooperating. They haven't seen much cooperation between the Democratic president and a Democratic Congress, so I'm not sure they see it's going to make a great deal of difference when the Republicans come in.
All right, another Senate seat we're keeping a close eye on is that in California. Dianne Feinstein, CNN's Greg Lefebvre, is at Feinstein headquarters in San Francisco. Greg?
Well, Judy, the mood here is not as bright as it was earlier this evening. The question around here is, does money talk? And apparently in California it does. By a vote, some would say, of 28 to 14, that is $28 million to $14, $28 million to $14 million. Mike Huffington, the Republican challenger, is giving Dianne Feinstein a run for her money here tonight in California. The exit polls show one thing. The count currently is showing something else. It's a very tense night here up north in California, and we will stay with it. Back to you, Judy.
All right, Greg, talking about money, we were just hearing from Brooks Jackson just before this. How much money was spent in this race? I mean, between the Republican and the Democrat?
Well, California's a big state with incredibly expensive television markets, and Michael Huffington got out there fast and said he'd spend whatever it takes.
This is what we have so far with just 3% of the precincts reporting. This is very, very fragmentary.
The what, 30 million? Was that the number? I stumbled. I can't get it out. $30 million. And Dianne Feinstein, I believe she took out a second or a third mortgage on her home.
Second mortgage, yeah.
Second mortgage on her home.
And she doesn't exactly come from a poor family herself.
She doesn't exactly come from a poor family. Her husband is a well-to-do real estate developer,
That's
I
right.
believe.
Exactly. And of course, we don't go anywhere unless and until we report all the important races. Clearly, this one in California, one of them. Our live coverage will continue in a moment.
Well, we were talking in the green room before we began this evening, and you were saying that in a sense the most important thing that's happened today is something we haven't even been talking about, and that is the Republican inroads further down at the grassroots level. You want to talk about that for a moment?
Well, for the first time in 60 years, Ted, Republicans have parity with the Democrats at really every level of the American political system. We now control both houses of Congress, have a majority of the governorships, and are close to even in state legislative chambers. So the 60-year dominance of the Democratic Party and the 60-year dominance of the New Deal coalition established by Franklin Roosevelt is over. It's a new era in American politics.
And that means what?
It doesn't necessarily mean Republican dominance yet. 25 years ago, Kevin Phillips wrote a book, The Emerging Republican Majority, and we've emerged, but we'll have to see what happens over the rest of this decade. I think Republicans now have a chance to become the governing party in American politics, the majority coalition in American politics, and really to set the path for the future.
To what degree does this represent not so much perhaps a rejection of President Clinton or even Democratic programs, but just this sort of cycle of frustration that has the American voter every 2 years throwing out whoever is in?
Well, I think that if you go back to '92, basically the American voter was frustrated and kicked President Bush out. And people at that time, a lot of people in the press said the Republicans are through, the Democrats have a new day. In 1994, the voters are frustrated, kicked out the people that they thought were running the Congress, the Democrats, and have given the Republicans a shot. It doesn't mean that the Republicans got it forever. It doesn't mean the Democrats are down. It just basically means that the American people are frustrated. They're demanding change. They want change. The Republicans now have an opportunity, as Bill said, but also a responsibility to put up an agenda now that they think the American people are asking for.
You know very well what the Republicans were complaining about. I'm talking about now the members of the House, that they were treated like second-class citizens, that no one paid any attention to them. And there's going to have to be a certain turnabout as fair play attitude that takes place in the House. And if it does, are we not doomed to some kind of gridlock all over again?
Yeah, I think what the Republicans have to be careful of is gridlock, because you know, the first opportunity is going to be GATT in this Congress in just the next month. I think the new Speaker, Gingrich, as minority leader in this Congress, will be supportive of it, and I hope Mr. Dole is as well. That'll be the first signal that there's...
The word is majority leader, not...
No, but minority leader in this Congress.
Oh, in this Congress, yeah.
And he'll be Speaker in the next Congress.
Right.
But as minority leader in this Congress, be supportive of GATT. And then I think it's a question of their sense of wanting to work with the president to convince the American people that they want to see change. They're not willing to throw grenades, and they're not willing to stop government. They want, and then to really test the president as to whether or not he really wants to cooperate. And I think this president does. I think there's an opportunity here. I think one of the things people don't understand, I think there's an opportunity here where you're going to see Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton actually working together, sitting down, working together. I think that's going to be one of the surprises.
Just a quick reaction to you from on that last point. I have a hard time envisioning Newt Gingrich and Bill Clinton sitting down and reasoning together, but maybe.
Stranger things have happened. I'm impressed by the way the word Speaker Gingrich fell off Tony Coelho's tongue, so trippingly, and I'm sure you and President Clinton will get more used to that. One story of this election, again, though, it's not generalized anger at all incumbents. Republican governors who have governed with a conservative reform agenda in states like Massachusetts and Michigan and Wisconsin were re-elected overwhelmingly. So I think there's a real message out there about the size and scope of government and cutting back on the size and scope of government. If Bill Clinton is willing to listen to that message, if he's really willing to commit himself to working with Republicans to cut back on the size and scope of the federal government, I think then we can work together.
Gentlemen, we're going to be back with you a little bit later. We have to take a break. When we come back, we'll be taking a look at the impact of the economy on today's voting.
This special edition of ABC News Nightline, the 94 vote, will continue in a moment.
Know that. It's been 40 years. I mean, it's almost been a permanent arrangement in Washington. Bob Michel is retired this year as Republican leader. He never served in a majority.
38 years, I think.
38 years. It is truly historic.
But he was well fitted to be in the minority, and I think Newt Gingrich is well fitted to be in the majority. I think the interesting thing about Newt Gingrich is as long as we're not going to have the joy of Ollie North in the Senate, and perhaps we won't have Margaret's favorite, Michael Huffington, in the Senate, to the person who is most obnoxious to political correctness in this city will be Newt Gingrich. He will drive you nuts because he believes in things, he believes in forcing things. He's not going to be a sit-down leader as most of the Republican leaders have been, including the ones I remember when the Republicans did control the House. They're going to have some very tough action programs. It's going to be a very lively time in the House of Representatives. Everybody says, well, they won't do anything. I think they're going to do a lot, and I think they're going to have some very, very sweeping tax legislation, which is going to prove a problem for President Clinton.
It's going to prove a problem because they're going to cut taxes, Margaret, for the rich people, and that's going to be a problem for Bill Clinton, huh?
Well, I want to defer to Gramps here on this historic moment, but Newt Gingrich is going to have to learn how to lead now, and he's going to have to temper this personality of his, which is combative and good on the outside, but may not necessarily, he's going to have to grow into leadership. I mean, he touched bottom over the weekend when he blamed Democrats for Susan Smith killing her two children.
Didn't seem to bother the voters, did it?
Well, I think voters didn't know, or
they didn't know. The press was screaming about it all weekend. The Democrats.
You don't think it was news that he said that, don't you, Bob?
He won despite
Bob, you do think it's news that he said that, don't
Margaret,
you?
Yeah, but it wasn't the end of the earth, and it certainly wasn't anything that I mean, I heard so much speculation this was going to affect the election.
Let's let Mona get in.
Well, contrary to what Margaret said, I think actually that the danger now is that the country, having spoken very loudly, saying that we want the end of business as usual in Washington, and I think this is really an expression of the fermenting discontent about the state of the culture, about crime. I think crime was a very important issue in a lot of these races. But that much having been done, I think that there's a danger Republicans in power will get fearful, will say, well, we don't want to seem like the party of the religious right. They may not be bold enough for what the electorate has been demanding. And that's a danger that I don't think is going to be talked about in the next few days, but it's a real one.
Mark Shields, let's stay on Newt Gingrich for a second, and I'd like you to give your view as to whether he's the person for the times, whether he's the person that can...
There's no question that Newt Gingrich was able to persuade a lot of Republicans who had accepted their minority status as a condition, a permanent condition, that they could do something about it. Now, as an insurgent, one does things that are provocative, that get headlines, that get attention. I could not agree more than with Margaret.
You have a hand in that part, and I won't let you down.
Texas is ready for a new generation of leadership, and I will provide that.
How sweet it is!
Welcome back. I'm Mary Tillotson.
And I'm Lyndon Souls. We will have the latest election results from around the country and some perspective from our analyst, Merle Black, who joins us this morning. Welcome, Merle.
Good evening.
And it's early in the morning on the East Coast, still pretty late at night on the West, but it's not all over yet, and we'll keep you up to date as we go on. Let's take a look first, Lyndon, at where the Senate lies at this hour. The Republicans went in this meeting to pick up at least 7 seats. So far, they seem to have done much better than that. With 95 seats in the House still undecided, it also looks as if this is going to be a Republican-controlled Congress altogether, both House and Senate,
when the new year begins.
And as we take a look at the totals as they're adding up in the House, the GOP needs an increase of 40 new seats, and it looks as though they may be picking up as many as 51 in this particular election. That would be the worst defeat for the Democrats since 1946.
And the governors, though they sometimes get short shrift compared to those national politicians in Washington, Merle, the Republicans have taken taken or kept 7 out of the 8 biggest, most populous states in the country. If you were a Democrat tonight, would you be searching for a new word for disaster?
Yes, and I don't know what that word would be. This is an unprecedented night in American politics in recent years, and the Republicans...
Majority of the House of Representatives elected since 1992. They'll be in their freshman and sophomore years.
Cokie, thanks very much. We'll come back to you a little later this evening. Here's what it looks like numerically in terms of the incoming Congress by our projection, but actually not by our projection, by what we've got going so far in terms of hard numbers. Here's what it looks like in the Senate. Democrats 47, Republicans 52, a gain of 8, 1 left to be decided. That's the California race between Senator Dianne Feinstein and Michael Huffington. On the incoming House, 197 for the Democrats, 207 for the Republicans, a gain of 35. Cokie Roberts, I think, is closer than anybody numerically I've heard tonight so far. Cokie, I heard you say 32 seats at one point. That's what it's going to look like in the new House. And here is the change for the governors, a net gain of 10 for the governors so far. The Republicans gained 36 seats in the House so far. We'll be back to continue our political coverage. And here again is Ted in Washington. Ted?
Well, actually, we're not going to be back for a while, Peter. It's time to wrap it up, at least for this phase of the program. We will be back for our West Coast audience. One of the best political movies ever made was something called The Candidate with Robert Redford. And I'm reminded of one of the closing scenes. He was a real long shot to win a senatorial race out in California, and finally he wins it, and he's sitting backstage at a hotel somewhere with one of his aides, and the aide says to him, "We won." And Redford says, "Yeah, now what do we do?" I suspect there may be a lot of Republicans tonight saying exactly that. That's our report for tonight. We'll have a lot more on this tomorrow, both on World News Tonight and then later tomorrow night on Nightline. I'm Ted Koppel in Washington. For all of us here at ABC News, good night.
In Texas, but it wasn't celebratory for the Bush family in Florida this evening. Lawton Childs, the only incumbent governor who's a Democrat in a big state, pulled it off. Jeb Bush made a mistake when he did the ad featuring Childs supposedly not having endorsed a death penalty, didn't he? Childs likened it to Willie Horton.
Yeah, I think he did. That may have been a turning point in the campaign in Florida. Jeb Bush seemed to have overreached, and there was a backlash against that.
That's right, and Childs defended himself very forcefully in the last debate they had, too. There's something that was not a surprise for Republicans in California, but it's got to be good news for them, given the number of electoral votes in that state. Pete Wilson, Republican incumbent, overcame the third member of the Brown dynasty to try and be governor of the California.
That's right, and that's a very large vote for Pete Wilson.
Also keeps him in the stakes as a presidential contender in '96, doesn't it? And we have a good piece of news for Democrats out of the state of Virginia tonight. Oliver North, we'll see it in just a moment. Oliver North was defeated this evening by Chuck Robb, the Democratic incumbent. It was far from enough to keep the Senate in Democratic hands, but there he is. Let's hear him say how sweet it is. And there we see the numbers. Marshall Coleman was again supposed to hurt Chuck Robb by pulling votes away from North, but that didn't happen either.
No, it didn't. I think Robb really united Democratic voters in Virginia. He got a large black turnout. And North essentially did not unite the Republicans. There are a sizable number of conservatives and Republicans in Virginia who just could not go for Ollie North.
This is the other good piece of news for Democrats tonight. Teddy Kennedy, who has had what, 6 terms in the Senate, is going to get another. This is actually his 6th term, I think, that's coming up now. And there he is, embracing his nephew.
And he's actually going to be joined by 2 other members of the Kennedy clan, a son, Patrick Kennedy, who won his race against Republican Ken Vigilante for Rhode Island's 1st district, and a nephew, Joseph Kennedy, the 41-year-old son of the late Senator Robert Kennedy.
Good news in Massachusetts, unadulteratedly bad news for the Democrats tonight in the state of Tennessee. 2 count them, 2 Senate seats in Al Gore's home state, lost to the Democratic Party. Jim Sasser, who was poised to be majority leader of the Senate if the Democrats had kept the Senate, which they did not, has lost his Senate seat, and Jim Cooper, who...
We're proud to have BET burning up the cable airwaves.
Warner Cable. Better TV, getting better every day.
This is CNN.
And the big political news of this hour, the concession of Speaker of the House Thomas Foley conceding defeat in his race with Republican George Nethercutt, a very slim victory for Nethercutt, 14,000 absentee ballots still out there, but Foley says he will fall a few votes short. A few minutes ago, he addressed his supporters. CNN has it on tape, and we'll bring that to you now.
I'm going to make a statement, a short statement, and then I regret I'm not going to take any questions at this time, but I do wish to make a statement. First of all, let me say to all of those who have joined in the effort of this campaign, they have our deepest appreciation. It was clearly the best campaign I have ever waged. It had more support, more outpouring of volunteers, more commitment than any of the past. But it appears to me that when all the votes are counted, we may fall a few votes short. So there will be a somewhat prolonged counting of the absentee ballots. But if the final result is, as it appears to be now, the 5th Congressional District of Washington will have elected a new representative in Congress. So first of all, again, let me now congratulate George Nethercutt and to promise him the full support of my office in the coming 2 months of transition. I want to express my deepest appreciation to the people of the 5th Congressional District who have given me the honor of representing them for the past 30 years. Nothing in my life approaches the sense of gratitude that I have in having held the office of representative in Congress. And I know the thrill of election as well as the honor of service. And so I want to say on behalf of Heather and myself that we understand the thrill that George Nethercutt and his family are experiencing today. And we offer all of them, the entire family, our warmest, best wishes. I want to also express my deepest gratitude to my colleagues in the Congress. Despite what some people think, the overwhelming membership of the Congress, Republican and Democrat, are wonderful, upstanding, and talented people who carry on the service of their constituents with honor and effectiveness. I want to say especially my gratitude to the members of the Democratic Party who have nominated me for their Speaker, and the Congress of 101st, 102nd, 103rd Congress that have elected me their Speaker. I want to say a word of thanks to the presidents that I've served with. 2 of them are now gone, Lyndon Johnson and Richard Nixon. But President Ford and President Carter, President Reagan and President Bush and now President Clinton have all been presidents who have sought to move our country forward, men of honor and integrity. And I have tried to give them my best service and counsel and assistance. I have always said that between elections, we must find a way to work together, Democrats and Republicans in the Congress, with the President of the United States to address the problems facing the nation. That is especially true today. I also want to thank my staff. I have had the benefit of an extraordinary staff, and most particular my wife of 25 years, Heather, who has been my unpaid chief of staff for so many years, and who has selflessly given of her time and great talent, not only to me, but to the people of this district and the nation.
That is the concession speech of Thomas Foley, thanking the people of the 5th Congressional District for keeping him in office since Lyndon Johnson was president. He was Speaker of the House and the first Speaker to be ousted by his constituents since 1860. Thomas Foley speaking to us from Spokane. Natalie?
Well, it certainly has not been a politics kind of day or politics as usual kind of day. Let's find out if it's a business as usual kind of day. Here's Terry Keenan at the New York Stock Exchange.
Thanks, Natalie and Lou. Well, prices fluctuating today a lot more than the polls. Blue chip stocks surged 38 points in the first half hour of trading following that strong Republican election victory yesterday. But they then dropped into negative territory, losing 20 points. Right now, the Dow back in the plus column. Dow up 10 points at 38.40. Trading volume is very heavy. The other key indexes are mostly higher as well. Bonds regaining strength. Long-term interest rates now stand at 8.08%. The Treasury's 30-year bond up almost a half point in price. In a rally for the U.S. dollar, it's up 1 3/4 pennies on the German mark, a penny higher against the British pound, 2/3 of a yen higher against the Japanese currency. One trader says interest rates are again the focus with the meeting of the Federal Reserve's Open Market Committee coming up soon.
People are really focused on what's going to happen at the FOMC meeting next week, and if it's a full percentage point rise, then yeah, the dollar will continue to rally. We really need to see what the Fed does before we can determine whether or not this is just a knee-jerk reaction that's going to fade quickly as people reassess the meaning of Republican victories.
As for what those victories could mean during the campaign, more than 300 Republican candidates signed a so-called contract with America. It promises, among other things, a balanced budget amendment, higher defense spending, and cuts in several taxes, including capital gains taxes. Meanwhile, drug stocks today riding the coattails of a Republican victory. That as investors expect sweeping health care reform to be pushed by the wayside. Healthcare stocks posting solid gains on Wall Street today. Pfizer up 1 1/4, Merck adding 3/4. Abbott Laboratories also up 3/4. Defense contractors seeing their stocks higher as well. McDonnell Douglas up $2 a share. Lockheed up 1 1/8. And that's the latest in business news. I'm Terry Keenan at the New York Stock Exchange.
Next, we'll turn our attention to the gubernatorial races across the country.
Victory, it rallied sharply, especially against European currencies, as investors hope for a more conservative fiscal policy from Washington. Bonds also higher on the day, though they cut their early gains. The Treasury's 30-year issue up 6/32 in price, and that brings long-term interest rates down to 8.1%. AT&T is expanding its customer base south of the border. The communications giant creating a $1 billion joint venture with a leading Mexican conglomerate. They'll target Mexico's business and residential customers. And that's the latest in financial headlines. Inside Politics is up next.
First of all, again, let me now congratulate George Nethercutt and to promise him the full support of my office in the coming 2 months of transition.
Speaker of the House Tom Foley swept out of office by a resurgent Republican tide.
3 to 47 will be happy to accept other applications. Thank you very much.
The GOP picks up another Senate seat as Shelby of Alabama does a party switch. Plus,
we were held accountable yesterday, and I accept my share of the responsibility in the result of the elections.
President Clinton surveys the post-election scene and takes part of the blame. It's all part of a special one-hour edition of Inside Politics. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Woodruff at CNN Center in Atlanta.
And I'm Bernard Shaw. What does a president say on the day after his party loses control of both chambers of Congress? Bill Clinton confronted that question at a news conference just a short while ago. Our senior White House correspondent, Wolf Blitzer, joins us with details.
Bernie, White House officials, ever since last night's political earthquake here in Washington, have been reluctant to blame Mr. Clinton, but Mr. Clinton himself says he's now ready to accept at least some of the heat.
Well, I think that I have some responsibility for it. I'm the president. I'm the leader of the efforts that we have made in the last 2 years. And to whatever extent that we didn't do what the people wanted us to do, or they were not aware of what we had done, I must certainly bear my share of responsibility, and I accept that.
Mr. Clinton said he and other Democrats should take a, quote, nap right now and let the Republicans enjoy their victory. He also, on a more serious note, sought to reach out and extend an olive branch to the Republicans, though he did attach some limits.
I will do everything in my power to reach out to the leaders and the members of this new Congress. It must be possible to make it a more effective, more functioning institution. It must be possible for us to give our people a government that is smaller, that is more effective, that reflects both our interests and our values. But to those who would use this election to turn us back, let me say this. I will do all in my power to keep anyone from jeopardizing this economic recovery by taking us back to the policies that failed us before.
The first test of any new bipartisan cooperation will come in the next few weeks during a special session of Congress that will have to deal with the new worldwide trade treaty known as GATT. Mr. Clinton is, of course, hoping that the Republicans will work closely with him on that. The other major setback for the president involves his own re-election prospects in 2 years. Already 8 of the 9 largest electoral states are now in the hands of the Republicans, certainly something that does not bode well for Mr. Clinton's re-election hopes. Bernie?
Wolf, a question with 3 elements to it. Will Bill Clinton move to the center? If so, how?
Well, he says that he now wants to govern from the center, and he says this is the silver lining of the message that was sent yesterday. He feels more comfortable governing from the center. He claims, if you speak with him privately, that early on he wanted to work with Republicans, but they spurned all of his overtures. He's now hoping that this new wake-up call to the White House will allow this kind of policy to move from the center, but it won't be easy given the fact that presidential elections and new congressional elections are only 2 years away.
Thanks, Wolf. Judy?
Well, political observers are scrambling for words to describe the impact of Election USA 94 on Congress. It's a tsunami and earthquake, a once-in-a-lifetime realignment. Says a man who supplies food for the U.S. House cafeteria system, quote, "You can tell people's party affiliation by who's smiling and who's not." In the U.S. Senate, the partisan split for the next Congress will be 53 Republicans and 47 Democrats. The GOP picked up 8 seats yesterday, plus 1 party switch today. In the U.S. House, it will be 229 Republicans, 204 Democrats, and 1 independent. The GOP gained 51 seats. 1 race is still undecided. CNN's Bob Franken joins us now with an update from Capitol Hill. Bob.
Well, now, Judy, it seems that congressional Democrats have suffered 1 more defeat now that Congressman Tom Foley of Spokane, Washington, has become the first Speaker of the House of Representatives since 1860 to be voted out of office.
But if the final result is, as it appears to be now, the 5th Congressional District of Washington will have elected a new representative in Congress.
It has been a wipeout, but Democrats say Republicans weren't content with that. They had 1 more insult. Richard Shelby started the day as the Democratic senator from Alabama, but he switched.
I thought there was room in the Democratic Party for a conservative Southern Democrat such as myself representing my people from Alabama and other areas of the South. But I can tell you there's not. There's not room.
Shelby and his new fellow Republicans are about to find out how different it is to be running things.
It's been kind of easy for them the last couple of years, being in the minority, having no responsibility, saying no to almost everything that came along.
It's a big change, and the Republican leadership wasted absolutely no time. Majority Leader in Waiting Robert Dole called the president first thing this morning.
You know, I said, I've been saying the last few days, whatever happened, I wanted to let you know right up front that we want to work together where we can, and I'm a legislator and have been over the years, so maybe we can do some business.
The business is actually being determined by the agenda of House Republicans. In late September, 300 of their candidates signed the so-called Contract with America, promising within 100 days votes on everything from a balanced budget amendment to tax cuts to tough new social programs. Now the contract will be the subject of debate. It's not a campaign gimmick or a way of putting the president on the spot.
I think it would be foolish for us to go out of our way to seek to embarrass the President of the United States. I think it would be very foolish.
But some of the Republicans often accused by Democrats of trying to embarrass the president will be in positions of influence. Incoming Senate Banking Committee Chairman Alphonse D'Amato can be expected to force the Whitewater investigation. The new House Banking Chairman, Jim Leach, will probably do the same. And Jesse Helms, who has been leading the Senate Foreign Relations minority, has still stymied several presidents. Now he'll likely be running the majority.
Call it what you want, an earthquake, a tidal wave, a blowout. As we say in the Midwest, we got our butts kicked. We're bruised and battered, but we're still standing.
They are barely standing. Judy, one thing you notice is that Republicans and Democrats now are all publicly declaring cooperation with one another. Of course, they have to at this point.
Bob, just one quick question. The first thing the president mentioned in his news conference a little while ago that he said he wants to cooperate with the Republicans on is this GATT worldwide trade agreement. Now, that is the old Congress that will be coming back to consider that, right?
That is the old Congress. The hope is that now that the political considerations are somewhat out of the way, they can get to GATT and get it done quickly.
All right, Bob Franken at the Capitol. Thanks. Bernie?
Election 94 is over. Campaign 96 already has begun. Deborah Potter looks at some of those who are harboring White House hopes and how yesterday's vote will affect them.
96, 96. And so it begins. While the votes of 94 are still being counted, the race for 96 is getting underway. The once and future Senate Majority Leader, Robert Dole, is well positioned to make his third try for the White House. But indications are he'll have plenty of competition.
The American people endorsed what I believe in, which is less government and more freedom. And certainly I believe that there's a constituency out there for that platform in 1996.
But will he run? Will former Congressman Jack Kemp? And what about former Vice President Dan Quayle? No one's saying officially yet, but the fact is they've been campaigning for months. And the party's hopefuls are clearly pumped up by the Republican congressional sweep, eager to take on a weakened Bill Clinton, who may even face a challenge from within his own party.
It's clearly taken the Democratic Party to its lowest level in about 50 years, and I wouldn't be at all surprised by what there'll be people who will have questions about his leadership and about whether or not they want him to lead the Democratic ticket in 96.
You can change this country's direction.
And what of a possible independent challenge? Does Ross Perot still have clout? Apparently not much in his own home state, where he backed Democrat Ann Richards for governor, who lost. But Perot did urge voters to put Congress in Republican hands. And even before the results were in, he was warning the GOP to deliver.
If they just pitter-patter around, play politics as usual, and everybody's running around with his own agenda and they don't look after the people's interests, we will form a third party.
Unsettled, then, is perhaps the best description of the outlook for 1996. Republicans here on Capitol Hill are riding high at the moment, but things can change.
Remember Harry Truman, the last Democrat to face a Republican House and Senate? In 1948, he campaigned for re-election against what he called a do-nothing Congress, and against all odds, won a second term. At the Clinton White House, one official says, the ghost of Harry lurks. Deborah Potter for CNN, Washington.
Already, one of the ballot initiatives approved in yesterday's elections is in trouble. A state judge in California has blocked the enforcement of part of California's Proposition 187. The initiative would bar public education and most other government services for illegal immigrants. The judge blocked enforcement of the section of the measure that requires illegal immigrants to be expelled from public colleges, schools, and universities.
Another Senate seat goes to the Republicans, but voters did not make the decision. We'll talk to Senator Richard Shelby live, as well as Spence Abraham, Michigan's newly elected Republican senator.
Inside Politics is brought to you by Chrysler and the new Chrysler Cirrus Sport Sedan.
The new Chrysler Cirrus has an advanced 24-valve V6. Its cab-forward design conveniently provides room for 5 and a vast array of new technology. It has dual airbags and advanced rail-through construction for superior handling and quietness. Chrysler Cirrus. While its name is derived from the heavens, one of the best reasons to own one is very down-to-earth. Chrysler Cirrus. It's not just a step above, it's the new plateau.
I'm about to perform an amazing act, something that was virtually impossible for me to do just a short while ago. The act of breathing, made possible by
Tavis D.
Original prescription strength Tavis D contains the medicine proven to help relieve tough congestion so you can breathe easier. So for the next 12 hours,
I will not sneeze. My sinus and nasal congestion is now clear.
breathe easier with Tavis D.
There's nothing else like it.
Sharon is a successful businesswoman who knows what she wants and usually gets it. Well, she wanted to buy a home. But being single, she didn't know if she could afford the home she had in mind. As her Realty World agent, I explained that today's interest rates and financing options gave her an excellent advantage. We worked out the numbers, and she was surprised at her actual buying power. Wouldn't you know it, we signed a contract in less than a week.
Now more than ever, the right agent makes all the difference in the world. Realty World.
Tonight, $1 million is on the line as four of golf's premier champions face off in the deciding final round of the PGA Grand Slam of Golf. Live at 6:05 Eastern tonight on TBS.
As we told you earlier, Senator Richard Shelby of Alabama today switched party affiliation. To find out why he's now a Republican, we're going straight to the source. Here he is, the senator himself. Welcome to Inside Politics.
Hello, Bernie.
Hi there. Exactly 2 months ago to the day, you told the New York Times, quote, "I have no intention of switching parties. I can be more effective inside the Democratic Party by moving them to the right." Now, I know that Texas Republican Senator Phil Gramm has been working on you for months and months and months. Did he?
How about years?
Years. Did he get to you?
No, he didn't get to me, but I'll tell you what did get to me, Bernie. Over the past couple of years, the Clinton administration and their initiatives have gotten to me because I found out, and I was the first one to discover in early 1993 that this was a big tax and spend administration. And I was the first one to oppose the tax bill. And you'll recall that. I was the first Democrat to speak out against the so-called health plan about 2 months ago. But I'll tell you, enough is enough, and I believe that I have worked hard. I've tried to work within the Democratic Party, but you can't deal with oil and water. And the ideology span is too big, and I believe that I represent, Bernie, the mainstream America, the overwhelming majority of the people of Alabama, and I believe 4 years from now that will be reflected when I'm reelected to the United States Senate. But I tried. I had high hopes for Bill Clinton. I had high hopes because he ran as a centrist, a new Democrat, but there's not any room for a person like me or a Southern conservative Democrat in the Democratic Party of today. That was a fiction. I found out the hard way. I should have switched parties 2 years ago. I thought about it. I wanted to work within the party, but I realized today, this morning, I said, enough is enough. This is the time to do it if you're going to do it. And I did, and I'm glad I did it. I regret I didn't do it 2 years ago.
We all know that politics can be very, very intense and very, very personal. Who in the White House rejected you personally? Did Bill Clinton, in face-to-face conversations, when you opposed what he was trying to do economically, ever tell you to butt out, or what?
Oh,
Take
no.
us inside on that.
You know, honestly, I personally like Bill Clinton. I've had several conversations with him. He visited with me in my home one time for about an hour. But I just disagree with the ideology that he's brought forth in America, and I believe yesterday's election spoke on that across the country. I've been saying this 2 years, Bernie. I've talked with you about it, but it's crystallized now. I'm glad I did it. I believe that I will be better off in the Republican Party, and I believe the people of Alabama will be served better by me being there.
Senator, exit polling yesterday showed that 47% to 31% of the constituents from your great state said that you should not switch parties when they were asked when they came out of the polling booths yesterday. Let me finish for just a second. And a lot of people in Alabama this afternoon feel jilted.
Well, they should be proud of what I did, and I'm going to tell a lot of them that they should join me. First of all, that poll is not a credible poll. That same poll predicted a lot of big wins in Alabama for the Democrats that didn't come about. This poll is not credible. What's real credible is the people of Alabama. You know, I've hung with them, I've stood with them, and they're going to stand with me.
Senator, did you hear President Clinton's news conference in which
I heard part of it, but I came over here and missed part of it.
Okay, just a quick, brief paraphrase. The president said he accepted part of the responsibility for yesterday's party losses. He said he intended to work with the Republicans, and he said he would be less partisan.
Now, that's good news. I wished he would do this. You know, Bill Clinton's got a lot of potential. He's smart. He's a good politician. He's likable. And if he will be mainstream, he will be do well serving the American people. If he does this, I certainly want to work with him.
Okay. Last question. In analyzing what is going on in the South, in your judgment, how has the Republican Party come to be such a force in the South?
They are realigning all over the South and all over the country, but especially in my area. What the people in the South believe, basically, is that the Democratic Party has left them. They haven't left the party. That's the way I feel, Bernie. I've tried to work within the party, but there's not room for people in the party like me, and that's what happened in Alabama politics yesterday.
Richard Shelby of Alabama woke up this morning as a Democrat, will go to bed as a Republican. Thanks for joining us on Inside Politics.
Bernie.
You're welcome, sir. Judy?
Dozens of Republican lawmakers will make their debuts on Capitol Hill in January, in addition to Senator Shelby. One of them, Spence Abraham, defeated Congressman Bob Carr for the seat vacated by Senator Donald Regal of Michigan. Like many of his new colleagues, Abraham is a relative newcomer to politics, never having been elected to public office. He joins us now from Detroit to talk about what he expects to do. First of all, congratulations.
Thank you very much, Judy. I'm, of course, excited and very grateful to the people of Michigan for giving me this chance.
I want to clarify something right off. Half the material I have calls you Spence, the other half calls you Spencer. Which is it?
Either one's fine.
All right, well, that doesn't help. I'm going to call you Spencer. I'm going to call you
Fine.
Mr. Abraham. Was this a pro-Spencer Abraham vote or an anti-Bill Clinton, anti-Bob Carr vote?
Well, I think, you know, in Michigan we had sort of an interesting contrast. On the Democratic ticket for governor and senator, we had two people who had served in Congress combined 32 years, and had really been supporters of a bigger government model of solving problems. On the Republican side, we had an incumbent governor, John Engler, who was overwhelmingly reelected during his term. He's reduced the size of government. I've fought with him to try to accomplish some of those things, to reduce the tax load on people, and we've had great results. We created more manufacturing jobs in our state last year than any other in the country. Our unemployment rate was below the national average right now for the first time since the 1970s, and so people had a clear choice. The big government team, the less government team, and I think both John Engler and I benefited from that contrast.
Well, speaking of Governor Engler, the New York Times said this morning your victory was due to the fact that you were able to ride on the coattails of Governor Engler.
Well, certainly we share the same philosophy, and we have worked together. We worked hard in our campaign, obviously, to win, but I give some of the credit to the governor's performance. It gave me a chance, I think, to, as I say, to contrast my views, because I want to take to Washington some of the ideas that are working in Michigan, of reducing taxes and spending, trying to give families a chance to keep a little more of what they earn. When my dad was a UAW, I remember working on the assembly lines at an Oldsmobile plant here back in the 1950s. The typical family in our state sent $1 to Washington for every 50 it earns. Today we send one down there for every 4, and people just want a change of direction.
What are some specifics in government that you'd like to see cut? What specifically would you like to see cut?
Well, I think some of the cuts that were embodied in the Penny Kasich legislative proposal on the discretionary domestic side of the budget.
For example?
Such things, the size of Congress. When my opponent Bob Carr went to Washington back in 1974, it cost $500 million to run Congress. Today it costs over $2 billion. I think that's too much, and I intend to take direct action myself in terms of my own Senate office to try to bring down the cost.
But that's really just a start, isn't it?
Oh, it is just a start, but it's an important start because we've got, I think, an electorate that's dissatisfied with what they think is unnecessary spending in Washington, starting right on Capitol Hill. So those are the kinds of things. And at the same time, I ran on an agenda that talked about trying to put a limit on the growth of entitlement spending. I've tried to be honest with the people of this state in our campaign, and I said, look, if we let entitlement spending continue unabated, as the baby boom generation ages, we're going to have a crisis in about 15 years that we won't be able to deal with. And so that's another way that I think we have to address the deficit problem.
Entitlements meaning Social Security and Medicare, so you would put a cap?
A limit on the growth is what I advocated in the campaign, and Even though our opponents attacked it and said it was a cut and it was going to hurt people and so on, most of the voters in Michigan understand that if we don't address these problems now and in the short term, the problems down the road in 15 years will be devastating. And I think people want politicians to stop pretending these problems don't exist and to confront them. I did in this campaign and was successful.
The president said in his news conference just a short time ago that he would like to cut taxes for middle-income families, but he said only if it's paid for in the budget. Now, is that something that's going to constrain you?
Well, I think that we have to look back at the history of tax cuts, both the ones enacted under President Kennedy in the 60s and the ones enacted under President Reagan in the 1980s actually produced more revenues. And it wasn't a problem of revenue collections during the 1980s that led to the deficit growth. It was the spending side of the equation. And I think that's what we have to address, because the kinds of tax cuts that I think the president may have alluded to, and certainly the ones I talked about in my campaign, are not going to cause the Treasury to have a shortfall because of lack of revenue.
Just one quick last question. You ran to a great degree, Mr. Abraham, as a Washington outsider, and yet you once served as Dan Quayle's Deputy Chief of Staff. You also worked in the Republican Congressional Committee. Can you have it both ways?
Well, I never said I was an outsider. What I said was that I wasn't the guy down in Washington voting for higher taxes and spending. And I presented an affirmative agenda to the people of our state to try to take the ideas that were working in Michigan to create jobs and to fight for them in Washington, and they responded.
Well, Spencer Abraham, we thank you for being with us
Judy,
again.
good to be with you.
Congratulations. Inside Politics, we'll be right back.
In the 80s, a lot of companies invested their pension funds in questionable real estate. Unfortunately, that's life. In the 80s, we invested most of our pension funds in investment-grade bonds. That's New York Life. New York Life, the company you keep.
When we asked two-time Indy winner Emerson Fittipaldi to be involved in the development of the Chrysler Cirrus, it wasn't to have him help sell the car. It was to have him help refine it. He pushed it to the limits around the track. He made suggestions. The engineers listened. The engineers made suggestions, and he listened. The result of this collaboration is a specially modified double wishbone suspension system unlike any other on the road today. The Chrysler Cirrus. It's not just a step above. It's the new plateau.
And I would like my daughter to be a doctor.
Once again, Encyclopedia Britannica presents a parent's wish list.
She perhaps would like to be a museum curator or something like that.
The more we love our children, the harder we wish for their success. But it takes more than wishes. You need to give your child all the advantages you can. And one great advantage is the new Encyclopedia Britannica. It's the best home learning program in the world. A 32-volume reference library with everything from instant information to in-depth knowledge. To get more information on the new Encyclopedia Britannica, call for this free color booklet. And just for previewing Encyclopedia Britannica in your home, you'll get this 3-volume desk reference set free.
I believe that one person can make a difference. I believe that one person can make an impact.
Now you can use your home computer to get even more from Britannica. Call now for your free booklet and details about the new Britannica CD.
Call now, 1-800-831-1616.
Gas. When bloating, pain, and pressure tie you in knots, don't make the antacid mistake. Take this little pill instead. Maximum Strength Phazine. There's more gas relief in one Phazine soft gel than in a whole bottle of regular Maalox. All this Maalox can't get rid of gas, but with the liquid medicine in just one Phazine, the gas is gone. Take Phazine, and the gas is gone.
Looking good. Facing with your car is a great idea.
Yeah, especially when it's my new Grand Am.
Well, you couldn't take my car. Doesn't have analog brakes or an airbag.
Or 150 horsepower. Your car couldn't keep up with me.
Man, this engine is really smooth.
What?
I said you're really starting to move.
Hey, where are you?
Every company has an Edwina, the planner, the organizer, the one who tracks your packages. Only today, she's out sick, and you have to track them yourself. Luckily, she uses UPS. Just pop in our tracking software and you'll know when your package was delivered and who signed for it in seconds. Now, if only you could use it to find the bathroom key.
Hello? Holiday Inn? I need a room.
A room with a place to work. A meeting room for my sales force.
Now, Holiday Inn makes it easier to choose the hotel with the room that best meets your business needs. New Holiday Inn Select, where business comes first.
You say your rooms have data ports.
Holiday Inn Express for overnight economy. And the Holiday Inn you've always known in over 60 countries around the world. Wherever business takes you, your room is waiting at Holiday Inn.
Hello, Holiday Inn. I need a room where I can relax.
Up next on Inside Politics, Iran-Contra and a conviction later overturned did not get him down. So what will Oliver North do now that he's not going to be a U.S. Senator?
Sunday, 5 years after they tore down that wall, Eastern Europeans are wondering if life is worth living a revolution. CNN presents Sunday.
Buying a new house means making a lot of hard decisions. No, honey, over there. But one decision that was made easy was the wallpaper. Why? Because the wallpaper's to go. They have a fabulous selection. I mean, don't you just love what they did to my kitchen? And the savings. Can you believe wallpaper's to go to this entire bathroom for only $199? That's the wallpaper and the installation.
Call 728-1766 for our $199 special. Wallpapers to go, the easy decision.
No tricks, no gimmicks, no fancy sales. At the Diamond Jewelry Factory, we never compromise quality for price. And we never mark up just to mark down. We just offer you the best value for your jewelry dollar 365 days a year. In fact, we've been offering our customers quality jewelry at affordable prices for over 19 years. At the Diamond Jewelry Factory, we don't sell less expensive jewelry. We simply sell expensive jewelry for less.
Here's how people use News Radio 740 KTRH.
I'm always in a hurry, so I switch to AM 740 KTRH several times a day for the latest news and weather.
When I want the latest news and need traffic information fast, I punch AM 740 KTRH for instant access.
I don't have time to waste. I always hear the news first. Plus, I get business updates on AM 740 KTRH.
Give us 30 minutes and we'll give you the world. News Radio 740 KTRH.
Says I might need open heart surgery. It's a pretty scary thought. But what choices do I have? I keep wondering if I'm going to be, okay. I got a 7-year-old boy to raise. I got to be okay.
Memorial Health Care System, a healthier approach to health care.
This is CNN.
As if Republicans didn't have enough to cheer about, a Democrat defects to their side. It is icing on the cake for the GOP and its newly won control of Congress.
Republicans also have stuck it to the Democrats in governor's offices across the country. Why did they win? And what will they do now? It's all part of Inside Politics. Welcome back for our second half hour. I'm Bernard Shaw.
And I'm Judy Woodruff. Once again, the American voters have demanded change, and they surely have gotten it. The people and the politicians still are coming to grips with last night's remarkable election results. Republican control of Congress for the first time in 40 years. In the House, the GOP now will hold 229 seats. The Democrats, 204. That is a 51-seat pickup for the Republicans. One seat has gone to an independent. One still is undecided. More salt was poured on the Democrats' wounds today when it became clear that GOP congressional candidate George Nethercutt of Washington State had helped to write a new chapter in political history. He defeated House Speaker Tom Foley, the first speaker to lose a re-election bid since the Civil War.
There will be a somewhat prolonged counting of the absentee ballots. But if the final result is, as it appears to be now, the 5th Congressional District of Washington will have elected a new representative in Congress. So first of all, again, let me now congratulate George Nethercutt and to promise him the full support of my office in the coming 2 months of transition.
Of course, under a GOP majority, Foley would not have retained the Speaker's title even if he had won. That job is expected to go to the current Republican minority whip, Newt Gingrich.
CNN today declared incumbent Democrat Dianne Feinstein the winner of a bitterly fought battle for U.S. Senator in California. However, since the contest with millionaire Congressman Michael Huffington was so close, Feinstein remains cautious.
There are a number of absentee ballots that need to be counted. I am optimistic that we are going to win this race just simply because of the way the ballots spread and the fact that as they're counted with this lead, I believe the lead is sufficient enough to win the race.
Huffington is refusing to concede defeat.
With 500 to 700,000 absentee ballots, I suspect the vast majority are ours, and I can't wait for them to be counted, but I know it's going to take a while. Reminds me of the Dan Lundgren race. Can't remember exactly what he won by, but I know it took 2 or 3 weeks to find out that he was successful. I don't think it'll take that long this time.
With 99% of the vote counted and those absentee ballots still being counted, Dianne Feinstein leads Michael Huffington 46% to 45%. The margin is just over 111,000 votes. Earlier, we interviewed Richard Shelby of Alabama, the Democrat, who today switched to the Republican Party. Now, counting Senator Shelby's switch, the Republicans will hold a 53 to 47 majority over the Democrats. The Grand Old Party picked up 8 Senate seats last night. That means Republicans now will be in the driver's seat in those key Senate committees. Senator Alphonse D'Amato of New York expected to take the helm of the Banking Committee and use that position to press for further investigation into the Whitewater affair. Senator Jesse Helms of North Carolina likely to take over as Foreign Relations Committee chairman. And 92-year-old Strom Thurmond of South Carolina, the likely heir to the chairmanship of the Armed Services Committee.
Facing that new GOP majority, not to mention his own 1996 re-election bid, President Clinton had few other options than to call for cooperation with Republicans. And that is just what he did during a news conference this afternoon. Mr. Clinton also acknowledged the anti-Democrat, anti-Clinton factor in the Republicans' election sweep.
With the Democrats in control of both the White House and the Congress, we were held accountable yesterday, and I accept my share of the responsibility in the result of the elections. When the Republican Party assumes leadership in the House and in the Senate, they will also have a larger responsibility for acting in the best interest of the American people. I reach out to them today, and I ask them to join me in the center of the public debate, where the best ideas for the next generation of American progress must come.
Mr. Clinton's comments were decidedly different from those of his aides. Publicly, they have been blaming everyone for the partisan sea change except the president himself. In Virginia, there was one Republican who was not carried to victory in the GOP tide that swept the rest of the country. Oliver North lost his bid to unseat the incumbent Democratic Senator Chuck Robb. What's next for Oliver North? Our national political correspondent Gene Randall has that story.
Confessing to a sense of hurt, defeated Republican Senate candidate Oliver North Tuesday night also suggested if he was down, he was not out. The former Marine cited his boxing days at the Naval Academy.
The first time I tried, I was defeated in the quarterfinals. And the second time, I lost my semifinal bout. But the third time, I won.
And with that, North supporters began chanting 96. In 2 years, Virginia's senior senator, Republican John Warner, will be up for re-election. Warner had rejected the North candidacy by backing independent Marshall Coleman. Is Warner Oliver North's next target?
I don't even think he's considering it right now. If that is a possibility that he's looking at, I think he'd start thinking about that in a few weeks.
Merritt pointed out that North's $18 to $20 million Senate run climaxed years of preparation, and he says there is no plan now for another race. Then there is the question of Oliver North's political stock.
I think that his future is very uncertain here. Ollie North kind of came into Virginia politics, parachuted in really almost at the top with the Senate nomination. But on the other hand, his roots here are relatively shallow.
And the fact is, North was kept out of a national GOP success story Tuesday night. Deputy campaign manager Mark Merritt blamed it on the attacks, including one from former First Lady Nancy Reagan, who called the one-time White House Iran-Contra operator a liar.
That was one of the death of 1,000 cuts. I think that was one of the cuts. And I think about 2 weeks ago, we're about at number 970, but finally we hit 1,000, 1,001 in the last week of the election, and it's very tough to sustain that kind of bleeding.
North made no public appearances on Wednesday. It is a good bet that Oliver North will stay politically active. He has a strong base of conservative and religious right support. He taps into a lot of popular discontent with his backing for such issues as term limits, and his fundraising abilities may be unmatched. But for now, says a top North aide, the most important thing for Oliver North is to regroup. Gene Randall, CNN, Richmond, Virginia.
The Republican power grab extends from the nation's capital into the nation's state houses. In fact, the GOP now holds 60% of the governor's chairs in the United States, and that includes nearly all of the most populous states. With 2 races still undecided, Republicans hold 30 of the nation's governor's offices, Democrats 17. Now that's an 11-seat pickup for the GOP, plus there's 1 independent. He's businessman and TV commentator Angus King. He'll be in charge of Maine State House because of a self-financed Ross Perot-style campaign. In New York, GOP Governor-elect George Pataki can claim one of the election's biggest conquests. He's the man who toppled Democrat Mario Cuomo after 3 terms.
During the course of this campaign, I have pointed out time and again, first, that I love the city. Second, that I understand how important the city is to the entire state. And third, that I'm going to be governor for all the people of this state. We are going to treat all the regions of this state fairly, the city, the suburbs, upstate. We are going to do what we believe is right for the city, for any part of this state. And I don't know that the people of this city need any reassurance. They should understand by now that I am deeply committed to seeing that this city succeeds, grows, creates jobs and opportunity, and is a part of a growing and vibrant New York's future.
Another big losing name, Democrat Ann Richards, governor of Texas. The man who defeated her in a hard-fought contest, George W. Bush, the former president's son, had some thoughts today about why he came out.
I've had some time to reflect on last night. I believe last night was a clear mandate for change. I stressed throughout the campaign that Texans were not happy with the status quo, that they were interested in changing fundamental aspects of our government. And I believe last night's results reflected that.
One big name Democrat who was not sunk by the Republican tide, Governor Lawton Chiles of Florida. Narrowly, he defeated the other Bush brother running for governor, Jeb.
It was an exciting, emotional, and for some, a shocking election night. Coming up, we'll get some perspective as we check in with some political pundits and with our own analyst, Bill Schneider.
When I get a cold, I need a strong medication. My husband's a doctor and can give me anything, but he recommends Dimetap Extend tabs. Dimetap controls my sneezing and nasal congestion. It's strong medicine.
For colds, doctors recommend Dimetap. Hey, what can you do with your computer?
I compose music and I create music videos.
I do research, I chat with friends around the world on internet, and sometimes I shop.
We watch our investments and send email to my sister in college.
And play a few games.
But how do you do it all?
Computer Life.
Computer Life.
Computer Life.
Computer Life. The cool new magazine that's all about you, your computer, and how you can get more out of both.
Call the number on your screen now to get a trial issue of Computer Life, free and without obligation, plus a free CD-ROM bonus, all part of this exclusive TV offer. Then you can experience for yourself all the productive, fun, and exciting things you can do on your own computer, whether it's choosing and enjoying the best in multimedia, entertainment, and game software, adding CD-ROM, connecting online, or just getting organized. You can do it all. Send for your free trial issue of Computer Life. Read it, use it, enjoy it. Join us as a subscriber and get a full year, 11 more issues, 12 in all for just $16.97. An amazing 52% off the newsstand price. Or cancel and owe nothing. You'll also get awesome new software, the Super Pack CD-ROM, free with your paid subscription. It's the ultimate home computing resource with hundreds of expert hints and tips, multimedia, entertainment, and lots more. Call now to get your free trial issue of Computer Life, plus a free CD-ROM. So, what do you do with your computer?
I'm learning to speak Japanese.
We're designing an addition to our house.
I use my personal computer to do just about everything I want to do.
How do you do it all?
Computer Life.
Computer Life.
Computer Life.
Computer Life, the cool new magazine that's all about you, your computer, and how you can get more out of both. Call for your free issue of Computer Life, plus your bonus CD-ROM. Call now.
1-800-451-4999.
Well, CNN's political analyst Bill Schneider joins us now with his own fresh perspective on this election. Bill?
Well, a massive anti-Clinton coalition came together and produced a revolution yesterday. President Clinton had a 45% job approval rating among those who voted. They voted over 80% Democratic in the House election. The 51% of voters who disapproved of Clinton's performance voted over 80% Republican. Half of those who voted Republican yesterday said they did it to express their opposition to President Clinton. 1994 was the mirror image of 1992. In 92, the forces that wanted change, like the Perot voters, sided with the left to elect the first Democratic president in 12 years. This year, they sided with the right to produce the first Republican Congress in 40 years. Now let's look at the 92 Perot voters. 2 years ago, Perot voters split their congressional votes evenly between Democrats and Republicans. This year, they voted 2/3 Republican, just as Ross Perot asked them to. Now, was this an anti-incumbent vote? No. Republican incumbents in this election did very well. Not a single Republican incumbent was defeated for senator, for governor, or for representative. Now, our exit poll tested anti-incumbent sentiment by asking voters whether government would work better if all new people were elected this year. The voters said no, by 57 to 39%. Was this a vote for gridlock? No. We asked whether the country would be better off with a president and Congress of the same party or a president of one party, Congress of the other. Most voters said the same party. Only 1/3 said different parties. Now, that's what they said. What they did, of course, was precisely the opposite. But when they voted for a Republican Congress, it wasn't because they wanted to see gridlock. What they wanted to see is precisely what they wanted to see in 1992. They wanted change. And they don't think they got it after 1992. By 55 to 39%, voters said things in the country today are off on the wrong track. And those who felt that way voted 2-1 Republican yesterday. Was it a vote for Reaganomics? No. We asked people whether they preferred to continue current economic policies or go back to Reagan's economic policies of the 1980s. By 5 to 4, they said continue with current policies. So, what kind of change did people really vote for this year? Essentially, it was the opposite of what they voted for in 92. Democrats have not yet proved to the voters that they can make government work. Now, the voters are saying, let's see if the Republicans can solve problems facing the country with less government. And according to our exit poll, the less people trusted the federal government, the more they voted Republican.
All right, Bill Schneider, thanks. Bernie?
Judy, Bill, coming up, more analysis of a political revolution underway. We'll hear from Doug Bailey, publisher of The Hotline, and Michael Barone of U.S. News and World Report.
The third baseman? That's my son. I'd like him to grow up in his own home. My friends gave me some tips on how much I can afford to spend, but it didn't sound right to me. have to wait until my boy makes it big in the majors, and then he can buy the house. Or maybe not.
At Fannie Mae, we're the nation's largest source of funds for mortgage lenders. Call us for a free guide to get you started on the path to home ownership.
Many auto security systems claim to protect your car, but Prestige gives you the ultimate in auto security and convenience. Prestige auto security systems from AudioVox. Safe, sound, and very, very convenient. For the Prestige dealer nearest you, call toll-free.
Now, here's a company that's been taking care of business for almost 50 years. The Dearborn Sausage Company.
Taking care of business.
The owner, Don Koch, learned how to make sausages from his father, an authentic Hungarian Wurstmeister. And these people, they're the Office Meisters, because when they want low prices on office products, they just call Office Depot and get next-day delivery. Did you ever try to send one of these through a fax machine?
Taking care of business.
The body of some American, some mother's son.
Their wounds had never healed, but now they search for the keys to unlock their grief. Sookie's Box, an Operation TNT world premiere special, tomorrow at 8 on TNT.
An understatement. The whole face of American politics has changed. Now that Republicans control the Congress for the first time in more than a generation, what can we expect? Joining us to address that and other post-election issues are Doug Bailey, publisher of The Hotline, a daily briefing on American politics, and Michael Barone of U.S. News and World Report. Your first thought, Michael, about what this means, bottom line, switch in the balance of power in Washington?
Well, I think it means that voters have said that Bill Clinton campaigned as a new Democrat in '92. He governed as an old Democrat in their views on budget and taxes in '93 and health care reform in '94. And they don't want to experiment with somebody that calls themselves a new Democrat anymore. They want the Republican formula, what I call just say no politics. Limit terms, more punishment and capital punishment, more determinate terms, cut budgets, line item veto, balanced budget amendment, and so forth. They are saying they want government strictly limited.
Doug Bailey, I noticed from the transcript of Cap Gain from last weekend, in summarizing your projections of the election, you said this means a revolution. At his news conference, White House this afternoon, at one point, President Clinton said, quote, "We're in the middle of a revolution here." You were on the money.
I think he's exactly right, Bernie. This is a revolution in progress. It's not over, and it didn't start in 1994. If anything, it started perhaps earlier than 1992, but 92, the target of the revolution was change the president. In 94, it's change the Congress. In 96, the Republicans may think back and rue the day that they got some new responsibilities and accountability, but it's probably change them all in 96.
Mike, when will the surly, angry, impatient American voters get this out of their spleen?
Well, Bernie, I think American voters are probably no more surly or angry now than they are in many other times. We have a different target of surliness. Many people in the press don't like it when they're surly and angry at Bill Clinton and the Democrats, but that's where they are today. When will they get over it? I think that one of the things voters are saying here is that they have constantly sent messages to government, and President Clinton alluded to this in his press conference, saying they want traditional values and discipline imposed in government services like education, welfare, and the prison sentence. And yet they see the people that are running those institutions with the acquiescence of public officials of the Democratic Party and often of the Republican Party as well, going along with lenient prison sentences, with schools that don't try to teach facts or impose discipline, with welfare system that discourages work and encourages a criminal underclass to be spawned. And they're saying they want something done about that. Doug Bailey is right. The Republicans now have to show that they are making some solid moves in that direction. Bill Clinton's answer to the voters seemed to be more government. They clearly don't think that's right. I think the Republicans may be on the track when they say things like, send the welfare issue back to the states, get it out of Washington, which hasn't shown that it can do and impose the kind of discipline they want.
Doug, I asked that question because I wonder whether or not American voters are expecting too much too soon from Congress. Is Washington really capable of turning on the dime and delivering the way the American voters have said they want deliverance?
I don't think Washington is capable of turning on the dime, and I don't think the voters, frankly, expect Washington to deliver very much. They'd like some things done, and they're of two minds, and most of us are. We're of two minds. One is we'd like Washington to do some things, but we don't have a whole lot of confidence that they can do them well. So we want health care, but my goodness gracious, when it comes right down to it, a 1,400-page bill, we don't have any confidence that the government can administer that well. Let me make a point about what Michael raised. I think that the Republicans are right if their position, for example, is to take welfare out of Washington and send it back to the states. But that is not the debate that is likely to take place here. The debate is how the Republicans want Washington to control welfare this way. The President and the Democrats will want Washington to control welfare this way. That debate is a losing debate, because it's Washington, more control from Washington, and that's really, I think, what people are very wary of.
I'm sorry we're out of time, Doug Bailey and Michael Barone, but very quickly, in 10 seconds, I hear each of you saying, we will believe bipartisanship when we see it here.
I don't think we're going to see bipartisanship here. I think both parties are going to have a chance to make a record and go to the voters in 1996.
It's in both of their interests to get something done, but I think it will be very, very difficult for them to get together to do it.
Gentlemen, thanks very much. Judy?
Then and now, Bruce Morton puts election 94 into historical perspective when Inside Politics returns.
Hey, good looking, what you got cooking? How's about cooking something up with me? Hey, sweet baby, don't you think maybe we could find us a brand new recipe?
For our cookbook, send $2 to the Catfish Institute, Belzona, Mississippi, 39038.
Sunday on CNN Presents. 5 years after they tore down that wall, Eastern Europeans expected they would find a better life along with their new freedom. Instead, they found themselves struggling to survive in countries racked with ethnic hatred, economic hardship, and political turmoil, leaving many of them yearning for the past and wondering if life is worth living a revolution. CNN Presents, Sunday, 9 Eastern.
According to the mutual fund forecaster, the Kaufman Fund is the #1 performing mutual fund from the market low of December 4th, 1987 through June 30th, 1994. The Kaufman Fund invests in small companies with substantial growth prospects. The fund is managed by Wall Street's dynamic duo Hans Uch and Lawrence Oriana. The fund was awarded Morningstar's highest 5-star rating. Call now for your prospectus, 1-800-824-0600. The Kaufman Fund, 1-800-824-0600.
Let's keep it pure and simple. We'll each have an ocean of peace. Let's keep it pure and simple and stay as long as we please.
Call for our new Florida Keys video and guidebook to see what we also do on shore.
Let's go to the real Florida. Let's go to the Keys.
Call 1-800-GO-TO-KEYS for your video and guidebook. Sure beats getting another dumb brochure.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Sidney. Coming up on CNN, some well-known TV and film actors are heading to Capitol Hill following yesterday's elections. And celebrity marriages are as endangered as a Democrat in Washington. All that next on Showbiz Today.
Thanks, Lauren. Well, throughout this hour, we have recapped the results of Election 94. They amount to huge Republican victories, defeats for a Democratic president and his party, and a dramatic shift in the balance of power. Well, how do these results parallel previous elections? CNN's Bruce Morton puts it all into historical perspective.
America's greatest atomic test.
The last time the Republicans controlled both houses of Congress, the Cold War was in full cry, Americans drove gas guzzlers proudly, and television came in black and white.
What do I do to get a little peace and quiet?
Why not just shut
But
up?
the most important difference was that Republican Congress had a Republican president, Dwight Eisenhower. This Republican Congress will have to deal with a Democratic president. So the real parallel may be the years when Democratic Congresses battled Republican presidents. Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, George Bush. Those presidents had a weapon.
They're going to have to contend with this veto I sent up, and obviously I want to see that veto sustained.
In fact, the Republicans won't be able to pass whatever bills they want because everything in the Senate gets filibustered nowadays, and it takes 60 votes to break a filibuster, cut off debate. The Democrats didn't have 60 in the last Congress. The Republicans won't in the next one. The President and the Congress may be able to work together on some issues. There was plenty of bipartisan talk today.
Well, the first thing we're going to do, frankly, is offer to work with the Democrats to reestablish the kind of openness that Sam Rayburn had in a different era. Bob Michaels often talked about a time when you could amend on the floor, when you could really craft legislation, a very much more collegial House than the one that has gradually become more bitter and more partisan.
The tone will be different, hearings on what new weapons to buy instead of what new social programs to pass, and the efforts at bipartisanship may turn sour. Some new senators ran against the president. Kyle of Arizona, for instance. Fred Thompson ran against Congress. He wants to shorten sessions, cut staff, and cut pay. The Senate Republican caucus will have fewer moderates like John Chafee, more conservatives like Pennsylvania's new Rick Santorum. That could push new Majority Leader Bob Dole to the right. More confrontation, fewer efforts at cooperation.
One other thing, the voters elected Bill Clinton 2 years ago because they wanted change. They elected a lot of Republicans this time because they still aren't satisfied, don't think Washington works the way it should. They may not be satisfied next time either, which could make 1996 a very interesting year. Judy?
Very interesting. Bruce, thanks.
That's all for this special edition of Inside Politics. I'm Bernard Shaw.
I'm Judy Woodruff. Showbiz Today is next.
The election dust is cleared. We'll have the big winners on Larry King Live.
Have delivered a mandate for change.
He says his decisive win over popular incumbent Ann Richards is proof of that. Larry Audis has tracked the Bush victory campaign, and he is joining us live now from our Austin newsroom with more. Larry?
Well, indeed, Mr. Bush will soon be ready to move in at the Capitol here in Austin. He says not too long from now, he'll step down as managing partner of the Texas Rangers baseball team. He's now talking with his attorneys about putting his assets in a blind trust. He and his wife are discussing where in this town they will live. He is, in effect, moving from private citizen to public citizen number one, and life for the Bushes and for Texas is about to change. He is now the focus of Texas. Voters, reporters, and his own family now vie for the attention of George W. Bush.
I love my state, and it's so important.
This Bush family changes. How does this affect the family, your kids?
Well, we'll see. I hope that it doesn't. One of the biggest concerns I had prior to becoming the governor of Texas was my family. Laura and I have got a wonderful relationship, and we love our children, and I believe that love will be able to overcome any awkwardness in regards to a lifestyle change.
Non-stop scrutiny is change number one.
That there is a bright future. I believe that message matters. I believe I won this race because I was able to articulate philosophical differences between the governor and me.
By now, everyone knows Bush's promise to reform education, juvenile justice, and welfare. He says everyone does not have to agree.
For those who did not vote for me, I will be your governor as well. My mission is to unite, not divide, and I mean that.
The changing of the guard and the Bush lifestyle is underway.
That's right, exactly. We're not sure what they're going to be yet, but we'll be making our decisions pretty soon on what we're going to do.
Mrs. Bush, apparently, according to Mr. Bush, is somewhat superstitious and would not talk at all about their plans for moving to Austin until the finale last night, until they actually won it. Now they're talking a lot. As for today, the Bushes were in Austin talking to campaign workers, did likewise in Dallas. Tomorrow, they'll be in Houston greeting their campaign workers there. We're live in Austin. I'm Larry Audis.
Steep learning curve for the governor-elect. Thank you very much, Larry. This has been a very quiet day, as you might expect, at the Richards camp. The governor, her state office, and her campaign staff all declined requests for interviews today. The Democratic incumbent spent much of the day visiting with campaign volunteers. She lost statewide, but she did carry Austin and Travis County.
I'm very sad. I'd rather have Ann than George Bush anytime.
I'm surprised by the results, but I think they're great. I'm looking forward to changing this whole process.
I'm really depressed that she didn't win, and I'm worried about Junior.
During what has been described as a gracious concession speech last night, Richards asked supporters to help Bush.
Well, Republican leaders in Harris County are jubilant about yesterday's vote. They say the election results far exceed their expectations. GOP volunteers spent this day after fielding a barrage of phone calls as Houstonians jumped on the victory bandwagon. The Republicans say voter anger fueled the gains made by their party, and plans are being made for further gains in '96.
I've already been talking to people as far back as August about who wants to run in '96, not even dreaming that we would do this well.
The Republican takeover of Congress has hit President Clinton hard. He says he got the message voters were sending him. In a news conference this afternoon at the White House, Mr. Clinton said as president, he deserves some of the blame.
Though we have made progress, not enough people have felt more prosperous and more secure, or believed we were meeting their desires for fundamental change in the role of government in their lives. With the Democrats in control of both the White House and the Congress, we were held accountable yesterday, and I accept my share of the responsibility in the result of the elections.
President Clinton says he is going to do his best to reach out to the new Republican majority in the House and Senate and try to be less partisan.
And on Capitol Hill, outgoing House Speaker Tom Foley will not be returning to Congress. He conceded defeat today in his extremely close race with Republican challenger George Nethercutt. Foley is the first House Speaker to be voted out of office since the Civil War. Well, the change in power will elevate some Houstonians to new positions of influence.
Channel 2's Ken Kaltoff is here with more on how the Republican onslaught is hitting home. Ken.
Jan, Houston has several Republican congressional veterans who've been pushed around for years by the Democrats. They are absolutely thrilled at the outcome of yesterday's election and the opportunities before them now. For instance, among his choices, Republican Tom DeLay may have to turn down being chairman of the important House Transportation Committee.
It was incredible. It was a revolution.
Overnight, Houston Congressman Tom DeLay has become something of a national celebrity. By phone, he's on a syndicated radio talk show broadcast in 8 states. He's front-runner to become Republican House Whip, a key leadership post in the party that will now be in control.
I've been campaigning around the country for candidates, and the political climate was just ripe for this to happen.
Houston Republican Bill Archer will be chairman of the powerful House Ways and Means Committee, replacing Chicago's Dan Rostenkowski. Republicans will be pushing their contract with America, a package that calls, among other things, for a balanced budget.
That's $1.3 trillion that they're going to have to come up with.
Ken Benson will be a freshman in Congress, a freshman Democrat, the party that used to have control. But he's not complaining.
I come from the business world. In the business world, you sit down at the table, you work out your differences, and you get the job done. I think that's what the public wants to see the Congress do.
Benson may be the only Democrat in America to upset a Republican for Congress yesterday. He beat Gene Fontenot, who outspent him 4-1.
I think the message that was sent yesterday was the public is tired of the gridlock. And if they see gridlock at the end of this next 2 years, I imagine they'll throw the leadership out then.
We realize that. We think we have changed the direction of this country through this election, and we want to maintain that direction more than 2 years.
The Republican contract with America is a very ambitious set of plans. It calls for term limits, welfare reform, crime fighting, tax and tort reform, and all of this in 100 days. Bill and Jan, they insist that we will be simply amazed at what they get done.
We'll see. Something to watch. Thank you, Ken. Well, already a judge in California has barred enforcement of part of controversial Proposition 187. It's the requirement barring undocumented workers from schools in California. As Karen Rostada tells us, more challenges to 187 are expected in California and here in Houston.
While students in California protest, Texans are watching. Governor-elect George W. Bush says he doesn't support Proposition 187, a law that denies education and other benefits based on citizenship.
I think Texas has the obligation to educate all children, regardless of who their parentage is.
Community leaders in Houston speak out.
We cannot be bashing immigrants if we want to expand
exploit the Mexican market as we do.
Port Authority Commissioner Betty Maldonado spent a year working as the mayor's NAFTA liaison. She says 187 is racist and will definitely have a negative impact on California.
I was, for instance, scheduled to speak at a conference and speak on NAFTA in California this weekend. I don't think I'm going to go.
Some wonder if the same thing could happen here in Texas. Well, it already has. About 12 years ago, Texas legislators passed a bill similar to 187. A group of lawyers got together, sued, and won. Isaias Torres is one of the attorneys.
Well, California is now trying to overturn this decision we obtained 12 years ago by provoking this lawsuit, which they will get sued, hoping that it'll come up again to the U.S. Supreme Court. And because of the 12 years that have gone by, the Supreme Court is much more conservative now. They're hoping that the Supreme Court will change their minds and uphold this kind of law.
Maldonado also heads the Hispanic Chamber and says the organization will take a stance on the new law. Karen Rostada, News 2 Houston.
Still ahead, we'll be getting election opinions from the next generation of voters.
Also coming up in Health Beat tonight, learn about an important discovery in the fight against AIDS.
And it's been a rainy afternoon out there. Find out if the front will bring a drop in our temperatures a little bit later.
Look, this furnace is just 5 years old, and the heat exchanger is already shot. Even a tiny pinhole in the seam can release dangerous carbon monoxide fumes into your home. Only Amana furnaces feature a tubular stainless steel heat exchanger that's guaranteed for life.
Purchase an Amana gas furnace backed by Amana's 10-year parts and labor protection plan and make no payments, pay no interest for 12 full months. Call Air Design and Control at 341-8431.
In a distant corner of our galaxy, an invincible alliance has been formed.
Engage! Let's go!
Jack in the Box and the new Paramount motion picture Star Trek Generations team up to give you a free Star Trek Generations movie collector's cup when you galaxy-size any Supreme Value combo. For just 39 cents more, beam up to bigger fries, a larger drink. Collect all 4 limited edition cups. It's a stellar deal for just 39 cents more, only at Jack in the Box.
You have to know what you're doing to do it right. Experience can make it easy. Practice can make it perfect. But only a true commitment to excellence can make it happen. We're Physician Corporation of America, and that's exactly what we've set out to do. Introducing PCA QualiCare, the Medicare solution. A quality health plan that minimizes your medical expenses and maximizes your ability to enjoy life. PCA QualiCare. Call us today.
From November 11th to November 20th, come home for the holidays at Old Town Spring. You'll find a tremendous array of Christmas shopping, holiday trimmings, and seasonal festivities, kicking off with a candlelight Christmas on November 11th and the lighting of Old Town Spring on the 12th. You'll be surrounded by the sights and sounds of handbell choirs, strolling carolers, and jolly old St. Nick. You can also participate in the Salvation Army wish trees. Come to Old Town Spring just north of Houston off I-45 at the Spring Cypress exit, or call 353-9310.
I'm Dominique Soxa.
And I'm Bob Nicholas.
Join us for News 2 Houston Daybreak Thursday morning at 5:55.
Learn how to prepare your pets for the winter weather.
And get some tips on dealing with a demotion at work.
That's all Thursday morning at 5:55.
On News 2 Houston Daybreak.
Don't miss the social event of the year.
Ross has fabulous evening dresses for just $29.99. Dresses you'd pay up to $100 for at department stores are only $29.99 at Ross. These name brand and designer dresses have just arrived, and you'll save 60% or more. Every dress just $29.99.
If you're not shopping at Ross,
now you can. Visit one of our 8 new locations today.
Maybe this rain this afternoon will bring in some cool temperatures, too.
That would be kind of nice.
And in fact, it's already doing that across
Good.
parts of the Panhandle and across the Upper Texas coast. In fact, the front is basically right on top of us, giving us some rain showers. Rain showers throughout the day, in fact, over at Rice University. Now, check this lady out. I don't really understand the little hop with her foot. She's going to do it again. I'm not exactly sure the significance of that little hop, but she's been doing... And she's still doing that stuff. We can understand it. But we had a few rain showers in and around the area, people taking the umbrella as we told them to, as some heavier rain showers now moving in associated with the front. But across another school from Rice University over to Ridgegate Elementary, all the kids there bringing in their donations, almost 2,000 cans that is going to go to some needy folks associated with the flood victims. So hats off to all those kids there, and hats off to all the kids over at Spring Branch Elementary. I was there talking to the kids, and we read this morning, and look at this great T-shirt. That's their symbol for their school over at Spring Branch. We want to thank all the kids all across, whether they're university kids or school kids. In around the city of Houston, showers and or thunder showers. High today getting up to 86 degrees. That'll start cooling down. Look at that morning low of 73. In fact, that was 22 degrees above normal for this time of the year. Intercontinental Airport will be cooling down. They're currently at 71, 75 right now at Hobby. Galveston reporting a temperature of 79. Humidity quite high at 78%, but look at the winds. They have shifted to the northwest at 16 miles per hour. Here's a radar, and we'll show you the showers and our thunderstorms. The leading edge associated with the cold front as it moves along the upper Texas coast and all moving towards the southeast. Here is the front. Look at the temperatures behind it into the 50s already in College Station. Austin cooling down to 6.
Snowfall has already begun in Denver, and we didn't think that would happen until late in the day when the temperature really started to drop. Well, the temperature started to drop earlier in the day, so a wet, slick snow in Denver right now. On the other hand, the storm that we told you would roll into the northwest and might produce some problems is moving slower, and I think it'll be late in the day by this time that storm moves in. So as you look now at the sea...
should increase their bond holdings to 40%, 15% in cash. And that is the latest in financial headlines. Inside Politics is up next.
The GOP has its eyes on a Capitol Hill prize, the possibility of wresting control of Congress from President Clinton's party.
Republican Oliver North turns out to vote in his combative race against Democratic Senator Charles Robb and urges his supporters to do the same.
The Bush brothers doing battle with Democratic senators in Texas and Florida. Will they sweep, split, or suffer a double defeat? It's all part of this Election Day edition of Inside Politics. Thanks for joining us. I'm Judy Woodruff at CNN Election Central in Atlanta.
I'm Bernard Shaw. No one has a greater stake in the outcome of this election day than President Bill Clinton. For an update on the Oval Office mood, we turn to our senior man at the White House, Wolf Blitzer.
Bernie, the mood here at the White House is one of nervous tension. At this point, our officials are simply hoping to avoid a Republican landslide.
Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States and the First Lady.
The President, First Lady, and their aides were trying to project an upbeat, business-as-usual atmosphere, though the stakes for his personal political future are enormous. White House officials were hoping the Democrats would lose only 5 or 6 seats in the Senate and 25 or 30 in the House, allowing them just barely to retain nominal control. That's their best-case scenario. To look optimistic, the President invited White House volunteers to the South Lawn to thank them for their help, and he repeated his campaign plea one last time.
It is very important in this election season that the American people not vote in anger or cynicism.
Earlier, he did some other unusual Election Day campaigning, doing radio interviews by phone with local stations around the country. The strategy was to get out the traditional and this year especially vital Democratic vote. The White House made sure he could be heard by women, minorities, and union voters in urban areas in critical states with close contests, including New York City, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, and San Francisco. At one point, he seemed almost resigned to Republican gains he had earlier portrayed as disastrous.
For most of the last 40 years, we've had divided government. We've had the Congress in one hand and the presidency in the other. The American people have kind of gotten used to that. So I don't know that it will make a great deal of difference in that sense.
The vice president did some last-minute morning TV interviews, rejecting predictions the Republicans would take over Congress.
I'm not conceding these Republican predictions. I remember when I heard that Mr. Gingrich and Senator Dole were making their transition plans, I remember that Tom Dewey was doing the same thing on Election Day in 1948. And the voters had a different conclusion.
Republican Party Chairman Haley Barbour concedes Mr. Clinton won a brief boost in the polls while he was in the Mideast for the signing of the Israeli-Jordanian peace treaty.
But once he came home and started campaigning for Kennedy and Cuomo and Wofford, and it reminded people of what this election is about, that it's about his policies and the failed Clinton Congress, and whether you want to keep going in the direction Clinton wants to take the country or whether you want to change direction.
Polls in recent days have been predicting doom and gloom for the Democrats. White House officials are hoping those polls have been wrong. Bernie?
Wolf, how will the White House spin turn tonight?
Well, there will be White House officials available to discuss what happens tonight. Leon Panetta, George Stephanopoulos, and others. The president, though, we're told, will not be seen or heard this evening. Tomorrow, though, at 2:30 Eastern, he'll be holding a news conference in the East Room of the White House, and we should get his assessment only then.
Thank you. Wolf Blitzer live at the White House. Judy?
All 435 House seats are at stake in Election USA 94. 35 of the 100 U.S. Senate seats are up for grabs, too. In the Senate, the partisan balance of power currently splits 56 Democratic and 44 Republican. A pickup of 7 seats would give the GOP its first Senate majority since 1986. In the House of Representatives, the balance of power stands at 256 Democratic seats, 178 Republican, and 1 independent. The GOP needs 40 seats to take control of the House for the first time since 1954. We'll discuss the balance of power prospects in the House with political analyst Stuart Rothenberg later on Inside Politics. It would be hard to overstate the volatility of this year's Senate contest in Virginia. It would be difficult to cite a race infused with more venom as well. Coming down to the wire, it is incumbent Democrat Charles Robb versus Republican and former Iran-Contra figure Oliver North. The wild card, independent Marshall Coleman, a former state attorney general. And joining us with the latest, our national political correspondent, Gene Randall, who is at North headquarters in Richmond. Gene?
Judy, though polls closed early here in Virginia, 7 p.m. Eastern Time, it could still be a very late night. It is a close race between Oliver North and Chuck Robb, and few people outside the campaigns themselves are willing to call it.
Senator Robb voted this morning with his wife and 3 daughters in McLean, Virginia, just outside Washington. Robb has been claiming he has momentum on his side, though he knows momentum has to be transformed into votes.
The nice thing is that we have a good day, good weather all the way around, and that's normally very good for Democrats, and it's going to be particularly good here because turnout is the key to this election.
Robb's hopes also rested in part on his ability to attract supporters of independent candidate Marshall Coleman, whose double-digit showing in the polls could split the anti-North vote. A Robb ad in the Washington Post today said, quote, "A vote for Coleman is effectively a vote for Oliver North." North, meanwhile, did his early morning voting with his wife in Pine Grove, Virginia. He has discounted all polls except those from his own camp, which he says put him ahead by 3 points.
Oh, I'd say it's probably going to go the right way, and by 11 o'clock tonight, Bill Clinton's going to have Excedrin headache number 10.
North did have some trouble finding end-of-the-campaign peace and quiet this morning, as dozens of pro-Robb demonstrators, many of them too young to vote, hounded him to and from the polling place. But then there has been a lot of noise generated by both sides in this race for the U.S. Senate from Virginia.
A North campaign source hours ago, noting a large voter turnout in Richmond, said simply, "That is not good news for us." Moments ago, a top campaign aide said, "There is a real nail-biter going on." Bernie?
Thank you, Gene. Another close and combative Senate race, this one in California. Now, this matchup in the Golden State is the costliest Senate race in United States history. In the incumbent's corner, Democrat Dianne Feinstein seeking a full term after being sent to Capitol Hill by that special election in '92. Vying to unseat her, Republican Congressman Michael Huffington, a transplant from Texas with very deep pockets. With the latest, CNN's Greg Lefebvre at Feinstein headquarters in San Francisco.
Bernie, I'm at the Fairmont Hotel above Nob Hill, atop Nob Hill in San Francisco, where Dianne Feinstein's supporters are putting together what they hope will be her second victory party in 2 years. They say they want a big party. They know that they've certainly paid enough to get here tonight. But the question is, did the voters get their money's worth? Dianne Feinstein spent more than $14 million fighting to keep her seat in the U.S. Senate, a colossal amount, but dwarfed by Congressman Mike Huffington's avalanche of cash, his own $27 million.
There is a great need for campaign reform, and that campaign reform should be on a number of fronts. Certainly, one of them is tight spending limits.
The two sides clashed over the hiring of illegal immigrants. Huffington suffered a jolt when he acknowledged an illegal alien worked in his home during the late 1980s. 14 years ago, Feinstein employed an immigrant who apparently entered the U.S. legally but carried no work permit. Immigration is a hot button in California as voters consider an initiative, Proposition 187, that would ban most public services to illegal immigrants.
I think certainly 187 has increased the number of people turning out, feeling strongly on both sides. I think the governor's race and the Senate race play a role in encouraging people to come to the polls.
As he voted in his hometown, Huffington acknowledged the major issues would bring out more than the usual number of midterm voters.
This is an important opportunity for people to change the direction not only of the state but this country. And if people want to change, they should vote for me. If they like the status quo and they think the country's going in the right direction, they should vote for my opponent. But I feel very confident after having spent a lot of time meeting 200,000 people, listening to their concerns, that we will win this election because they do want change.
Now here we are slightly more than halfway through the voting day. Dianne Feinstein's campaign is not over. We understand she will be placing get-out-the-vote telephone calls from her headquarters this afternoon. Greg Lefebvre, CNN, live in San Francisco.
Thank you, Greg. Up next on this hour-long election edition of Inside Politics, we check in on high-profile governors fighting for political survival. They face an angry electorate and, in 2 states at least, the brothers Bush.
CNN's campaign.
Even more so than in previous years, a lot of the suspense and the sparks of Campaign USA 94 are coming from governor's races. One of the more heated matchups is in Texas. Democratic
He's hoping for a second term to head up the State House. Democratic challenger Kathleen Brown cast her ballot with family members in Los Angeles.
All voted. We're all set. Say, everybody out there vote for Grandma.
The 49-year-old grandmother, daughter of Pat Brown and sister of Jerry, is hoping to make history, becoming the 3rd member of her family to be elected governor of California. Proposition 187 is the lightning rod issue driving this election. Weeks of angry protests have prompted Los Angeles authorities to put law enforcement on alert, on the ready should any problems arise. Brown strongly opposes 187 and is pinning her campaign hopes on a strong voter turnout.
I think those people that vote against it, I hope, will vote for me and vote against someone who has made it such a cornerstone of his campaign.
Wilson supports the measure to cut public services to illegal immigrants and has made it a central theme in his re-election bid.
I think it'll pass. I think that people all over California of all races understand what it's about. They understand that it's an effort to bring fairness.
Well, nothing definitive yet to report on voter turnout, but we can tell you here in Los Angeles County, only about 16% of the voters have cast their ballots so far. But keep in mind it is early on the West Coast, and some experts are predicting that what they call the not likely voters will turn out in force as the day unfolds. We're here to keep you posted. For now, I'm Pat Etheridge reporting live in Los Angeles.
Thank you, Pat, and we'll examine some more hot races when we come back.
Including one with a Democratic incumbent who the Republicans would especially like to put on their trophy wall.
Every company has an Edwina.
Not since Nelson Rockefeller has a New Yorker won 4 straight elections for governor. Well, today, Democrat Mario Cuomo is trying to equal that political feat. But he has to get by Republican George Pataki and several independents, including millionaire Thomas Golisano and anti-abortion activist Robert Walsh. CNN's Jeannie Most joins us from Cuomo headquarters in the Big Apple. Jeannie?
Judy, when he voted for himself this morning, Mario Cuomo seemed a little on the mellow side, a little subdued. He compared waiting for election results to waiting for a jury verdict or waiting for a baby. And this could be quite a wait tonight because this is expected. This race is expected to be a squeaker. Now, Mario Cuomo was ahead of his opponent, George Pataki, in the latest polls, but only by a couple of percentage points. Could this be the final curtain for Governor Mario Cuomo, or is it simply the next act? His opponent nearly lost his head in the voting booth, but he's not prepared to lose the race.
Everybody is fired up and pumped up, and we're going to win the race.
After 12 years, it seemed New Yorkers didn't love Mario Cuomo anymore. He went from being the golden-tongued darling of Democratic conventions.
We give money to Latin American governments that murder nuns, and then we lie about it.
To being the subject of a bumper sticker with a message that stuck. Cuomo's relatively unknown Republican opponent has one big advantage. He isn't Mario Cuomo.
Mario Cuomo, too liberal for too long.
But New York's Republican mayor gave Cuomo a hand, a big hand.
Mario Cuomo is so much better than the Republican alternative that I had to cross party lines.
Talk about cross. Listen to this angry heckler at a Cuomo rally.
Giuliani is a whore. Can I tell you something? The way you use that word, you look to me like a guy who's very familiar with the species.
The leaves changed, and so did the polls. Cuomo up, Pataki down, Pataki gaining at the end. But an independent millionaire candidate named Thomas Golisano could wipe the smile off Pataki's face by siphoning off enough votes to help Cuomo win. And in a departure from normal practice, George Pataki is out campaigning today. Usually on Election Day, most candidates sort of call it a day and relax, but Pataki, in about 10 minutes or so, is expected to be outside Penn Station here in New York, campaigning among commuters. After all, there's about 4 hours until the polls here in New York close. I'm Jeannie Most, reporting live from Cuomo headquarters in New York.
Thank you, Jeannie. Now, another Democratic icon who looked to be in trouble was Senator Edward Kennedy of Massachusetts. But political winds in the Bay State now seem to be blowing against GOP challenger Mitt Romney as Kennedy bids for a 6th full term. CNN's Candy Crowley is at Kennedy headquarters in suburban Boston.
Bernie, there was a time when it looked as though this might be ground zero for Democrats. Senator Ted Kennedy, a 32-year veteran of the Senate, the leading voice of liberalism in Washington, looked to be in real trouble. His challenger, a moderate Republican named Mitt Romney, was putting up quite a fight. And there was a time when it looked as though Romney, who is the son of the
incumbent Ann Richards versus Republican George W. Bush. CNN's Tony Clark is at Richards' campaign headquarters in Austin. Tony?
Judy, voting officials, state officials say the voting appears to be, initially, it appears to be heavy across the state. The weather has cooperated, making it easier for people to get to the polls. That's very important here in Texas because both Ann Richards and George Bush say voter turnout could be the key to victory, and both have been working hard to get their voters to the polls.
And this is Ann Richards. Absolutely. The one and the only.
Governor Ann Richards worked the phones at her headquarters in Austin Tuesday, encouraging supporters to get out the vote. She says the key for her to win re-election is a large turnout. And in her words, she's cautiously optimistic.
I think all the things are in place and all the factors are there. And it's been a tight race, and it will be until the last vote counted.
Richards voted before Election Day. She was one of nearly 1 million Texans who took advantage of the state's early voting period. Her Republican opponent, George W. Bush, waited until this morning to cast his ballot. The son of the former president forgot his voter registration card, but didn't have any trouble being recognized. After casting his ballot, Bush said he feels confident.
We've got a great grassroots organization in place, and if things go the way they think they'll go, I owe a great debt of gratitude to the thousands of Texans who have agreed to help in my campaign.
See y'all later.
Bush spent the day relaxing in Dallas and will be here in Austin tonight as the votes are tallied. Going into the election, this race was too close to call, and it should be a long night for everyone. If she wins, Ann Richards would become the first governor in Texas history to serve 2 consecutive terms. Regardless of the outcome, she says this will be her last race for public office. Tony Clark, CNN, at the Richards headquarters in Austin. Bernie?
Thank you, Tony. Now, the other state where Bush is a dangerous word for the incumbent. Florida's Democratic Governor Lawton Chiles is vying against Republican Jeb Bush. CNN senior correspondent Charles Bierbauer is watching the race and the turnout from Bush headquarters in Miami. Charles?
Hello, Bernie. Indeed, the balloons are up, but we can't tell if the balloon will go up yet for George Bush. It's that kind of a race. Conventional wisdom suggests that if the turnout is large, that would favor the Democratic incumbent Lawton Chiles. But the favor would go to Republican challenger Jeb Bush if the turnout is lighter.
but conventional wisdom could be off in this case. We've got to break down the demographics even further. So what we're looking at is the ethnic vote, Cuban Americans, African Americans, and the vote upstate versus downstate. Governor Lawton Chiles, showing a lead in the late polls, cast his vote in Tallahassee. Chiles has been through this repeatedly, a three-term senator seeking a second term as governor. But he's still grumbling about this harsh race.
Everything you do is kind of like you're doing it for the last time. Every campaign is tough. You run everyone like you're behind. I've never had my record distorted like this one in 9 statewide races, but it was a tough campaign.
In suburban Miami, where he voted, Republican Jeb Bush predicted a close win, not an easy one. Then Bush headed off to make one last push for the Cuban and Hispanic vote.
County-wide, right now, the first projection is that it'll be 80% Hispanic turnout, which is phenomenal. And the other groups aren't nearly as high.
Bush's daughter Noelle was helping out, but his parents, George and Barbara, who helped raise campaign funds here, are staying home in Texas.
I talked to my dad last night, and he was a nervous wreck. I know this from firsthand knowledge, that it's a lot harder to be the father or the son of a candidate than it is to be a candidate.
Jeb Bush says he also talked last night with his brother George, the Texas candidate, for the first time in months. Bush will be here in Miami watching the returns and hoping for a Bush family reversal of fortune. Governor Chiles has left Tallahassee en route to a traditional cup of coffee in Tampa. The Chiles campaign is heavy on tradition, and that may not seem terribly significant, but the governor has never lost a race here in Florida, and he's been in a lot of them. Charles Bierbar, CNN Live from Miami.
Thanks, Charles. Nervous wreck, eh? Well, we'll see. As in many races, turnout also is key in California, where Republican incumbent Pete Wilson faces his Democratic challenger Kathleen Brown. CNN's Pat Etheridge is at Wilson headquarters in Los Angeles. Pat?
Well, in just a few hours, Governor Pete Wilson will be joining his supporters here in the Grand Ballroom of a Los Angeles hotel. He's hoping, of course, there will be cause for celebration in the wake of a close race for the California State House. Republican Governor Pete Wilson got up early to vote in his hometown, San Diego.
Former governor of Michigan might even pull this out, but that's not how it looks this evening. Polls show he's going to lose this race, but en route to the poll, he hopes will prove all the others wrong. Mitt Romney had a smile on his face and a bit of hope in his heart.
I get more and more support every day, and I'm very much planning on winning this one.
Doing his bit to turn out the vote, Romney arrived at the ballot box with his wife, 3 voting-age sons, and 1 daughter-in-law.
We're going to stuff the ballot box legally. There you go.
Though he looked highly vulnerable when the election season began, Ted Kennedy now enjoys a comfortable lead and appears headed for his 6th full term as the senator from Massachusetts. The senator spent a quiet election day, but his campaign remains at full throttle. Aides say up to 300,000 calls will be made urging the faithful to the polls. A heavy turnout is expected to favor Democratic candidates in this heavily Democratic state, and turnout is described as brisk. The Massachusetts Secretary of State thinks if the pace continues, more than 2/3 of registered Massachusetts voters will cast ballots. After all the shouting,
go, Mitt, go! Go, Mitt, go!
and after all the speeches,
Do you know that since Ted Kennedy's been in Washington, he's voted for higher taxes 69 times?
Nothing else will work unless we have a growing, sound economy, and that means jobs. Jobs, 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 jobs for Boston, and jobs for Massachusetts.
The real sound of democracy seems quietly reassuring.
Pull the red lever to your right. On your way out, pull it to the left.
If Ted Kennedy wins this race, as he's expected to, there will, of course, be many reasons talked about it the next morning, but one of them seems overriding, and that is the message of tradition. As one Kennedy supporter put it, you know, when you go into that voting booth, when you turn around, the pull is very strong to still pull the lever for a Kennedy. Candy Crowley, CNN Live, Boston.
Thanks, Candy. Please don't touch your channel. We have another half hour to go in our Election Day special edition of Inside Politics. When we come back, we'll look at the balance of power in the House with our political analyst, Stuart Rothenberg.
And our election coverage is only beginning. In just 1 hour, we'll have a special election preview you won't want to miss.
Election night results with Republican Chairman Haley Barbour and Democratic Chairman David Wilhelm on Larry King Live tonight, 9 Eastern on CNN.
Here's how people use News Radio 740 KTRH.
I can't be late. AM 740 has more traffic and weather updates than any other station.
The midterm election campaigning is over. The knowledge of whether his party will lose control of the Senate, the House, or both lies ahead. Though Mr. Clinton has been keeping a low profile today, he did show up on the White House lawn this afternoon to say thank you to volunteers. A last-minute decision was made to open the event to the press, perhaps in hope of getting in one last presidential appeal to voters to try to limit the Democrats' losses.
At these midterm elections, it is critical that people understand that there are clear choices between going forward and going back, between a government that works for ordinary families and one that works for organized interest, between a government that does something about our great national problems like crime and one that just tries to talk them to death. It is very important in this election season that the American people not vote in anger or cynicism.
Mr. Clinton undoubtedly will have much more to say when he holds a post-election news conference. CNN plans live coverage tomorrow at 2:30 p.m. Eastern.
Will it be a GOP landslide or an amazing show of Democratic survival? Let's get some final predictions and some early spin on where Washington may go from here. Senior Presidential Advisor George Stephanopoulos will join us shortly. First, let's talk with Jack Kemp. He's the co-director of the conservative advocacy group Empower America and former housing secretary. He joins us from Washington. Welcome.
Thank you, Bernie.
First question. Could your opposition to Prop 187 in California actually turn out to hurt your party's Republican Senate candidate?
Well, I don't see it happening. Pete Wilson is way up in the polls, in the exit polls. I don't know how 187 is doing, Bernie, but in my view, it was very important to speak out on a matter of principle and conscience, and I can understand the message that California wants to send to Washington to do something about the border and about illegal immigration, but I didn't like the wording. I thought it was going to be potentially discriminatory against people of color, and I think someone had to get people to read the actual language, and that's what we tried to do, and hopefully they'll read it and make a decision that I